There we go.
I actually see this computer.
Want me to actually, it's recording now.
Okay. And again, by default, it's just uploading it to the cloud.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's whenever you set it up.
Very good.
Oh no, you're being saved there. Yes, I'll do that. Sorry, the first like 20 minutes of your meeting is just going to be me staring into it.
No worries. No worries. All
right. So, okay.
If anything, we go back and kind of just see what like each different meeting is like.
Exactly. Yeah. And create alternative ways to do this.
Yeah. So we are recording. So
okay,
the last one was uploaded already. So we have me talking.
Okay, good.
So we have it recording. Perfect.
Good.
Okay. So you should be good to go.
Excellent. Perfect.
So whenever you want to share your screen, just go ahead and click on share.
Share.
And then your screen, and then click share.
Oh, perfect. Okay, and then when I stop, then I can do the other one.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Excellent.
Cool. Let me see if I can actually put this up.
Oh yeah, this part. Yeah.
Is it live stream?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so you could actually, you can watch it. Yeah, you can.
You just press join and then.
Yeah. So join the meeting. We are.
I just want to see.
Yep. So we are. Let's see.
Yeah, because that one worked earlier today.
Oh, it did.
See, you're in here for a while.
Yeah, one of these works. One of these doesn't.
Oh yeah,
This one.
Let's just try this, man. Press 181.
Yeah.
Dash 954.
One of my classes is
Sorry, I don't want
No, you're right. Dash 948.
I believe it was that one because she said it.
Oh yeah, there I am.
Perfect. Excellent.
Oh yeah, it worked.
Oh, so that's perfect.
It's on this side.
So that's another way to do it. So if you want to do, if you want to log right in, you can also do it. You can also watch it. So go to Zoom. Do you use Zoom? No?
Yeah, it works.
So go to
It never
Zoom.
just works.
Oh, that's amazing.
It never just works.
It really doesn't.
Well, no, look at that.
Weird.
And then the ID
Really
is right at the top. 181-954-948.
Looks like my computer's in Windows.
Excellent.
All right. So
Excellent.
good
Dude,
to go.
absolutely. Yeah, all good.
All right. So what
Okay.
time are you ending today?
What time are we in?
45.
6:45.
All right. I'll be here around
Sounds good.
6:45 then.
Sounds good. Great. Thanks.
No problem.
Okay. Today is our first all new to us lecture today. We're going to be talking about national income today.
National income?
Yeah, national income will be our focus today. Again, I'm going to stick with slides here at least, well, especially in the beginning, if only because this is good. I can kind of make sure. So where are you seeing on yours?
Oh, let me
Yeah.
upload Zoom. What was it? Oh, right there.
181-954-948. What broke your laptop?
Bringing it to school.
No.
All right, right here.
Did you used to bring it in the? I don't remember. Did you used
Well,
to?
yeah, I used to bring it every day. But
Then you threw it at someone?
So this is my second laptop.
Yeah.
I've started bringing to school, and then they both kind of go
Stops?
faster than normal. I usually keep my laptop like 5 years without
That's a long time now.
without even like having like some kind of mechanical problem. But
Yeah.
then the last two laptops both started having fan problems.
Oh.
When I started bringing it.
Convinced me in that class.
Yeah, I guess you shouldn't.
How's your ECOG?
Yeah, even though my backpack says,
Can you like run around and stuff?
Yeah.
Maybe you should.
really
Because ECOG.
Yeah.
Like
Good
to
in sports.
some degree.
the first so
Okay.
Then you do
I
rehab,
had
right, and
to
stuff.
I had rehab.
Yeah, you should
So I
need
had
to though for
rehab
this.
for,
I think the other way you could do it too is I think if you download the Zoom app on your phone, you could actually watch the lecture on your phone too.
But I don't need it if I'm here present.
No, it'd just be you don't want to look there. You want to look at your screen.
that is it.
There's no difference. Yeah, you're totally fine.
Oh yeah, I like it.
Okay. So, okay, so let's start. Now, I made these slides a long time ago, and they really are tried and true. They're really good slides. Now, I'm not just saying that because I made them, but what's interesting is that I made them in 2006 or 2007. So right now, most of these things are not going to be data because this is just deep theory, not like data kind of things. But I did make all, so there's going to be typos from every now and then, but that's the beauty and the joy of someone making slides versus the slides being from a publisher. So you could tell me that there's a typo, but I doubt I would change it because I probably didn't change it the last time someone told me. Yeah, so this would be 181-954-948. Yeah. And again, so for these, so what I was saying for these presentations, again, if you're in class and you want to bring your laptop to class, you go into zoom.us, I think, and then you could type in this ID number for this meeting. But again, now going forward, all of these lectures will be recorded as well. So it'll take like a day or so to get it uploaded, but it should be pretty good. And again, you always have that option too. If you couldn't be here, physically be here for class, you're totally fine. Like we're not gonna have to like show your face or anything like I saw when Cash signed in. You can say like, don't show my video, don't show my audio. I mean, that's not the important. I mean, no one's caring about that unless you miss Cash and you want to hear his voice. Or if I was really mean and be like, Cash, tell me what you think, right? I mean, yeah. But I mean, you could watch it from, you could do it from home and not have to worry about that kind of thing. Okay, so let's start. Okay. So this is what we're going to do here in this topic. It's probably, I'm trying to see if I can finish it all day today, but if not, it might spill into next week. I'm not going to go fast. This is certainly not a class where I want to speed up. The theory is most important out through the beginning of November. Then in November, we actually have fun time where we can cover topics that interest each of us more. Like if we want to do more international, if we want to do more about capital markets, whatever you want, we can decide that. But if we run out of time, which sometimes happens as well, I'm not going to cry at night silently in my bed about the fact that we didn't get those things done either. Like the theory is the most important thing. So what you're seeing right here, what we're trying to do here is we're both looking at the, we want to see, sometimes in a principles class, when you take a principles class, not when I do it because I don't typically cover this model, but you may have had an instructor, Dr. You probably does it, you know where they like constructed one of those like circular flow diagrams and they had like consumers here and then they had like firms here and they talked about this thing like, you know, the government being right here, and they would talk about things like movement of products or services. So right, so firms sell stuff to consumers, consumers sell their labor to firms, and then right, that consumers then use the money they earn to buy the products that the firm sold to them, and that the firms take the money they got for the things they sold and pay it to workers and wage, right? That kind of circular flow diagram. Mm-hmm. But what you're seeing that's important about this, which is kind of the point of this chapter, is we need to then say, when we're looking at total output, it's obviously the exact same thing as the total income. So we're going to talk about that identity first. And then we need to talk about, in the production process, you may remember from macro or even micro, that there's two components within the production process. Inputs are used to make the outputs. That would be capital and labor. Well, then we need to then talk about how those two groups are compensated, right? Why is it that if we were to say the total income is that 100% of it, how do we decide how to split that up between those who own capital versus those who own their labor, and how we decide to split those things up? It's not a political decision. It's actually determined by rates of return. How productive is that capital? How productive are those workers, right? Unproductive. Why do workers in developing, there was this article I was reading I was talking about the gig economy and how all these things are bad, but you could, here's the cool thing I learned. So like I could meet, I'm married, right? But I could meet like special lady friend and like say like only have known her a week and I don't want to write like a love poem to her, but I could be like, I could go, I forgot even what the website was. I guess I don't need it, but right. But I could go on this website. I could, Fiverr. That's what it's called, Fiverr, FIVR.com or something. But I could pay someone $5, and they would get someone from, like in this case, it was someone from Serbia wrote this like 2-page like love poem or letter at the direction of this guy who like told her to write it, and it had this like cool line, like her favorite number was 8, and the person had this line of like, if you put the 8 upside down, that's how long we're gonna be with each other, like to infinity. Really cheesy, right? But if I can't think of those lines, and I only had to pay someone $5 to do it, right? That might be a pretty good deal. Now Sung is gonna go home. All of a sudden, his wife's gonna be like, "Whoa, he's writing me so many love notes now." Or you just use that free line I just gave you.
Right, so you're gonna look at my credit card bill and go, why is it all $5?
Fiverr. Why is it all $5? But then apparently, this is the whole thing though. Why am I talking about this? The website Fiverr, they take like a 20% commission, then there's like a fee and all this stuff, such that the person in Serbia is getting like $2 or $3, and they're doing this thing too where it's like they're doing like astrology readings and like all these kinds of things for $5 when the person normally charges $160. Why is the person doing it, selling their services? Because most of these people, they're like, dude, it's pretty good anyway. Like, yeah, that person put a lot of work into making a 2-page love letter, but at the same time, she was getting paid more than she could in Serbia for doing other things. Why is that? Well, part of it could be, look at Serbia's capital infrastructure. If the workers could be just as qualified in Serbia as they are here, but they might have shit to work with, right? I mean, they might not have the computers, the equipment and whatnot to actually be productive. On the other side, we know of other countries that seem to have all of the natural advantages, yet they're not productive because the workers tend not to get, tend to be undereducated, and because they're undereducated, then they're not productive with all the vast capital they have surrounding them. The perfect example of that, which you sometimes may not think of, would be something like your Saudi Arabia kind of example. Saudi Arabia has lots of capital, right? They're in capital-intensive industry of oil extraction. So they've got tons and tons of capital, yet they have an education infrastructure that's not as strong as certainly the Western world. And the result is that they've got lots of capital, but the workers aren't productive because they don't have as much of the human capital. Or your story like India. India, which has really, really highly educated people, but the other side of it would be not enough physical capital. That's why this is all figuring in here, right? And I've just named you countries that are both developing, developed. That's what's all determining these sorts of things. And we'll end that discussion then by talking about, so what does that mean? That how do we get equilibrium then in the overall? So that's kind of where we're going here. Okay. 2 things about this model. It's closed economy and it's market clearing. Closed model means essentially that for now, we're not going to presume that there is a net exports market. So there's going to be no exports, no imports. Every country has to do everything themselves. And the other side of this would be that the market will be entirely clearing, which would mean that we probably don't have I mean, I see that there's a government spending here. So there obviously is a government, but the government's not going to be heavily invested in regulating this market. Markets are generally going to be clearing. And if markets are clearing, that probably means the government's not imposing price floors, for instance, like minimum wages or price ceilings for products. So basically, this is just a freely operating market. And what we're trying to figure out first would be, if you remember back to GDP, gross domestic product, it consists of 3 components: consumption, investment, and government spending. Which would mean then that we need to understand now, this is our goods side of the market, our demand side of the market, right? Because these, with no net exports, the only 3 categories in this economy would be the consumer side, consumers buying goods and services, the investment side, that would be building machines, building houses, building factories, and then government spending. That would be government spending on physical goods and services, not transfer payments. If you remember back to principles, this would be the government buying a bridge, the government buying healthcare services, that sort of thing. And what we're trying to do then is put these two things together, because in the supply side, we have a production function where I'm putting together capital and labor to make an output. And then over here, I have people buying those products that have been produced over here. So what we're trying to do is now figure out the equilibrium between the two, between the goods market, right, and the production market. And then the final thing we need to talk about is we need to talk about a loanable funds market, meaning how are we going to control the money now that's going to operate in this economy, that's going to make sure that the payments are all flowing. Okay. Maybe if you had me for principles of micro, we would have talked about this. I'm not entirely sure if Dr. Yu covers this. But the very simple model for the economy is that there are two inputs to the output. The two inputs would be that you have workers, which are counted as L, and capital that's counted as K. K for capital because in German, capital starts with a K. Now the workers, this is not just the physical number of workers, this would actually be how productive are your workers, right? So this would be where you would say Kristen's 0.5 of a worker because she's undereducated. Ian is a 1.2 because he's overeducated. Song is a 0.5 because he's lazy. Jacob is a 1.5 because he's a perfectionist, right? I mean, right? I mean, that's what I'm saying here, right? We could think of the characteristics of workers, and they could come from more than a worker or less than a worker, depending on how productive they are. The question then is, right? You notice here when I said those things, I gave you some reasons about why they were more or less than one, right? Lazy, right? Undereducated, overeducated, has no social life, right? I mean, you put all those things together, and you can figure out why workers are the way that they are. I mean, I was thinking about, dude, when I was unmarried and didn't have kids, right? So, I mean, you were probably very productive. I know I was. I got a lot of junk done. But I was also working 7 days a week.
What?
You know? Well, I mean, I'm a professor. There's always stuff to do. I mean, you know. Yeah, I don't work on the weekend. The capital, same thing, right? Your capital could come from more or less depending on how up to date it, and this computer looks ancient, right? So it's probably a 0.2, right? Versus the OWL, which might be a 1.3, right? Which seems pretty up to date. And obviously, with both of these factors are also flows. The flows would be, right, we can lose capital over time, which for you accountants would be what?
Depreciation.
Depreciation, exactly. So our capital is depreciating. We have to replace it at a rate at least equal to that, or our capital stock falls. And then with our workers, we're talking a little bit of that is human capital, right? So skills become outdated, right? If I said I know how to do Fortran, that's right, versus Python, that might, right? One skill is out of date, the other is up to date. But also I have a labor flow in terms of, dude, people die, people get born, and all those sorts of, you know, worker regulations and whatnot. So these are both stocks and flows that we have to be thinking about. And that's what we get here. So again, I know I'm kind of like talking about the slides and I'm not writing a lot of things on the board, but I also, at this point, don't have to really write a ton here because you're kind of listening to me give you the narrative about these slides. You can read the chapter. I'm not stopping you from reading the chapter. I'm just trying to, I mean, again, in the class, just kind of spell out a large tale narrative about this. For those of you who this is your first intermediate class, this is obviously a little bit different because I like lived all the time on the board and was drawing things out. But here, I'm kind of thinking about this a little bit more theoretically than we are graphically. If anything, we're going to be thinking about this more mathematically than graphically. So here's our production function. Our output Y is a function of K and L, capital stock, and labor stock. Again, the K and the L is going to change over time based on the flow. But also within that functional form, we also have a black box. That black box reflects the technology. When I say black box, I'm like physical black box, but the technology is within this functional form. By that I mean, right, there's lots of mathematical ways that we could display something as being a function of K and L, right? It could be like K squared L cubed, right? Or it could be K to the 1/2 L to the 1/2. It could be K to the 1/2 L cubed, right? Why it has those exponents is a reflection of the technology. And the technology isn't necessarily what you think it is. Technology is not computers and owls and other things like that. Computers and owls is actually K, right? So when we say here, the economy's level of technology, you know, make a note to yourself, if anything, that this does not denote like computers and things like that. What technology is for an economist at this level is the processes, the methods, the acceptance of the way that I combine workers with machines. We'll just use machines as a general term to refer to capital. Like, it's pretty, right? Let me give you the only examples I can, the very stark examples I can think of. Would you, how many, Jacob, in your lifetime, how many sandwiches have you bought from a machine? Not like a ton, right? I mean,
10 bucks.
yeah, exactly, right? And the reason why is because most of the time, like a classic like sub sandwich, right? You just go to Subway or wherever, a person makes it, a sandwich artist makes it, and it's a pretty labor-intensive process, right? Now, how many like Cokes have you bought from a vending machine? Well, let's use me as an example, right? Hundreds, thousands, right? Lots and lots and lots of them, because it's not really a labor-intensive process. Now, those are conventions in some sense almost unique to the United States, right? That we do things that way. And again, the other examples would be, right, that in some cultures, right, it's just accepted that machines will do more of the work, right? Like I've never been to Japan, right? But all the stories I hear, right, is that Japan is the crown jewel of vending machines for anything and everything, right? The vending machines for probably sandwich making, and I could probably pick what I want on my Subway sandwich. They would also have probably soda and vending machines, but they also have like beer and all those other cool things, right? And then also like too, right? Like if we do France, right? They actually may be opposed to vending machines because they take away workers' jobs, right? So there probably are very strict rules about vending machines. Here on this campus, in all the UH system, there's actually very, very, very strict rules about the number of vending machines you can have on this campus. It's considered sales, and if you want to do one thing, you got to take away another. So apparently, when we got, you didn't listen to this story, you're like, when we got that like other center that like serves stuff, we had to get rid of a vending machine. I think it was just the Monster Energy from one, so it wasn't like a big total loss. Yeah, no, yeah, that because it was, I don't know if it was revenue or something was going on with the chancellor being rid of it, right? Who probably decided that? Probably a union of some kind. I don't know. It's probably right our default.
Good question.
Right, but even, oh, sorry, and the last thing would be, even something like a union would be a perfect example of the technology, right? Because a union bargaining contract typically dictates how many workers are going to be required, how much technology is going to be, or how much capital is going to be allowed, right? Because capital can't be unionized, right? So unions obviously want to protect, it's all about regulatory capture, right? They want to make sure that workers exist. So technology is all about the exponents, what we're going to have for K&L or the lack of exponents. Yeah. You know.
So, when you say to technology, you're saying how much of workers' labor we have to use to create the output? What's the official definition?
So here's the best way of thinking about it. The best way of thinking about this would be, is that, so some sort of exponents would exist. And And if in looking at these exponents, I were to double my number of workers in capital, let's say I doubled both of them, both stocks. The question then would be, do I get more than double the output, less than double the output, or equal to double the output? So I doubled both of my inputs. What's happening to my output side? That's all going to be determined by how well workers work with capital, right? Whether I get more, less, or equal to it. Because if it's scalable, let's just do a scalable example, right? So a scalable example would be that right next to this campus, I put exactly the same number of buildings, exactly the same number of professors. Well, and let's just presume that we had enough extra students that we could have exactly the same number of students. We could probably largely replicate this campus right next to us, right? And we probably would be totally fine. But if I wanted to do that for, let's say, artisan purse manufacturing, right? It might be a little bit harder to do, right? Because I might have trouble getting enough, I don't know, like people hammering these studs or whatever into leather, and I don't know if I need, but cutting and something, right? But you get the idea that usually with like handcrafted things, like very labor intensive things, doubling your number of workers in capital doesn't really get you double the output. On the other side, think about automobile manufacturing, right? Teslas right now are largely made by hand. Tesla wants nothing more than to have the volume of sales to be able to have an assembly line. Because once you have an assembly line, the beauty of that is that I'm doubling, let's say, my workers and my output, but now I'm getting more than double my output because I have a huge assembly line. Rather than making Jacob put in all the airbag system, he can just focus on driver side, right? Because now, right, someone's working on passenger side, right? And Cash will do side airbags, right? So when I have a big operation, now I actually become more efficient, right? Because now he just has that same ratchet in his hand, put in the one, send it off to someone else. So a lot of it's going to depend on the general thing that you're making. And all that's going to be dependent on, again, the nature of that manufacturing process and how you're going to be able to pull it off. Now, the last comment I'll make about that, though, is that keep in mind that this isn't focusing on a single market. So this is not just artisan crafted. And this is, yeah, all the goods in the economy. So now so this is truly a macro kind of discussion of this. But it's inspired by our micro understanding of the production process. So what's nice about intermediate theory classes is now you're seeing how the two, I mean, macroeconomics is the youngest of the two. Macro really only became a subject in the 1930s. Micro has been with us much, much longer, which would mean that people who are trained to be macroeconomists were microeconomists before that. And so you see these micro foundations to macroeconomics. And you're seeing that right here.
So it's only for goods, though.
Yeah, goods in general. Yep.
And what was the comment you said earlier about processes? You said.
Oh yeah. So the level of technology will reflect habits, processes, practices, social values, government regulations. They're all the things that dictate, manage. I'm trying to think of more synonyms. Dictate, manage, control the way that we work, that we as workers, physical workers, work with, well, let's just say machines. Let's just keep it simple. How do workers work with machines? To what extent do we allow them to work with machines? Right? It goes back to like, even think about like, what is it, that whole debate, right? Uber, and should there be autonomous driving, right? And then all of a sudden the states have to come across as like, we're anti-robots because we don't want cars driving themselves. But then at the same time, they're like mowing down pedestrians. So, I don't know. Or like, right, Ian, remember Dylan in class and I was asking him today, are you afraid of making robots because you're worried they're going to like kill you or something? Yeah. I mean, right, so I mean, all of us have probably gotten frustrated with our computer when it's broken, when it shouldn't have, and we probably wish that we didn't have computers anymore. And we all know people like my father who is only vaguely understanding technology and voicemail. And on the other, right, you can't find a mouse for the life of them. Versus, right, teenagers, I guess, which are all tech savvy. And even if you think you're young, it's probably a teenager right now that can do a lot cooler stuff than you even. So should start to feel old already.
Don't worry. I'm getting there.
Dude, I've never been on Instagram. That's why I'm dated. Our first social network was Friendster. It was so cool. Any of you have a Friendster account?
What was that like?
Does it still exist?
Friendster? I think it finally. So it was the very first one, and everyone had Tom as their first friend. He was the guy who made it.
MySpace.
It was it came before MySpace. Yeah, now I guess it's a game, I guess.
I remember hearing about
So Friendster, what was cool about Friendster though was that you got your friends, but what was also cool about though is you got to find out who was like the stalker of you, so you knew right away like, oh god, I should totally not make that person my friend anymore and get rid of them, because they couldn't like stalk you, because you could look and say, oh dude, Jacob's looking at me 5 times a day, dude, what's going on with him, right? And then I could get rid of him as a friend. Friendster, I guess. But yeah, it was the same kind of structure. You had a wall and you had.
And Tom was also the first friend.
So Tom was my very first friend because everyone got him.
MySpace same way.
Yeah, so it was MySpace the same way. Yeah, you can
Tom
do
was
that.
the first friend.
So Friendster. Yeah, see, it's like eventually Friendster. Go on Friendster and do Wikipedia. It'll show you that way, because it may not exist anymore for all I know. I mean, I suspect that in this space. Oh yeah, so it used to be a social networking service, and then it got redesigned because probably Facebook pushed out. But even Facebook, dude, don't go. I mean, did anyone keep up on like the testimony that was earlier this week? Sheryl Sandberg, CFO, I think, or CEO of Facebook, said that like a quarter of all adults have at some point in this past year deleted the Facebook app from their phone. Now, some have probably reinstalled it, but a number of people are dropping Facebook because, dude, Facebook's kind of creepy, right? I mean, I don't post on it a ton, but I don't know, right? I mean, we've probably all taken a little social networking vacation, haven't we? Levi, have you? Are you on social Facebook? Kristen, are you?
He's on immediately.
Awesome. What about you?
I was off it for a few years. But
Yeah, now you got back on. I think I have my profile picture. I think it's from 2013. I think on mine, I think people would know I'm married because I think there's some pictures from my wedding, but I don't know if I don't think they would. I've never posted a picture of any of my children on it. I think I don't think I can get to that. Do you post any pictures of your daughter? You do? Is your wife though more of a Facebook person than you, or are you?
she does the Korean app.
Oh, okay.
Cobb-Douglas or something like that.
Okay. How about you, Cash?
Yeah, I'm on. Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
but again, you're becoming old-fashioned because the cool kids are using Instagram and whatnot. So
Snapchat, Twitter.
you're what Kesha would call a dinosaur. Remember that?
Was Twitter before Facebook or after Facebook?
I think it was
After.
But like, there's a thing where like you would start on Twitter and then you kind of log back off because you don't know how to use it, and then you'd come back. That's what happened to me. Like to
Not
me, it
on
was so
Twitter either.
complicated to use it.
I'm not on Twitter either. But I don't have anything to say. I could talk all day, so when I get home, I don't want to talk to anyone. Okay, so this goes back to my comments then about the math of this and why we're going to return to scale. So this again is now really trying to understand the technology. Why is something, what are the exponents and what are the returns to scale tell us? So again, this is my story of if I double the inputs, so I get double the outputs, less than double, or more than double. So to understand that, what we need to do then is say, okay, let's first have then our output y equaling a function of our capital stock and our labor stock. Then let's increase everything by the same factor. So that's again like, let's say I doubled everything or tripled, or in this case, what if I increased everything by 25%, as in this example here. So, right, what we're then trying to understand, so right there we restate, right? So then capital in time period 2, right, would then equal 1.25 K1, right, because it'd be 125% of K1. And labor stock in time period 2 is 1.25 L1. Now remember, does not mean physical numbers. It doesn't mean that I necessarily have 25% more workers. I can have the same number of workers, it's just that they're 25% better educated. Human capital education is actually in the L, not in the K. So that's what sometimes a small population country does to grow, like Japan, right? Japan's population, they have a problem, right? They don't have enough workers, but they make up for that somewhat by having a good education system. Yeah.
So that means pretty much all intangible things that can increase your output is all grouped into L, and all tangible physical things that like will help you increase your output is grouped into K, right?
Both L and K, yes.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah.
Intangible things, the things you can't physically touch, but still help increase your output.
Yes.
Right. So that would group into L. Like education,
Yes.
you can't touch that, right?
Right. Correct. Yeah. And so this could also be increasing though, because I'm actually increasing my physical number of workers. This would be immigration. Then you get your like double threat, right? So then, right, you get your like Trumpian statement of like, we want workers, like the good workers from like, you said like Sweden or something, like some highly educated country, right? Because then you're getting a worker and you're getting a highly educated worker, right? And then I think the other comment was, right, you didn't want workers from like shit places, right? Like you didn't want workers from like bad places because then you're bringing in a physical worker, but they might not count for point A. Now, I assure you that Trump did not use the understanding I had as, but you know what his major was in Penn? He went to Ivy League. Economics, dude. I mean, come on. But I'm sure when you're Trump, you probably got to skip class. I would assume.
So is these a factor of your choosing?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
So, so then we want to know, well, how does this stand out here, right? So this is just the general statement of this. We're not getting into math yet, but constant returns to scale would be, I got 1.25 for output after increasing this by 25%, increases by 25%. Here, increasing this by 25% generated more than a 25% increase in the output. And increasing this by 25%, or I guess the other way to say it would be, to get this to increase by 25%, I would have to increase this by more than 25%. The inputs by more than. It's the inverse way of thinking of it. Decreasing returns to scale would be to get a 25, read about it a different way. What if my manager said to me, I need 25% more Christmas trees?
Mm-hmm.
From a planning perspective, I probably need to know how much more inputs do I need. Usually it's that way, right? And that's what this is trying to get to, right? If I need 25% more Christmas trees, how many more acres, how many more tree cutters, how many more, et cetera, do I need to do that?
Well, this is pretty useful.
That
means that you can like test different scenarios and put different Ks.
Absolutely, yeah.
Y1, Y2, Y3, and like send to your manager, hey, I got all these scales. What do you want to do?
And this is exactly, and so this right here is exactly what Elon Musk is doing these days, is this kind of slide. Because he's got 3 huge projects, and all 3, and I'm not making this a Tesla class because I know I talked about them last week here, but he's got 3 big projects that rely on an assembly line being perfected, but he doesn't have the scale of the output to make having an assembly line cost efficient. That would be, he produces solar panels / batteries, he produces cars, and he produces rockets, right? So he needs the scale of the output to justify, right? So what he needs is he needs the consumers to be, let's say, doubling or tripling, so that then he can deploy an assembly line that doesn't need a doubling or tripling of inputs, right? Because that's what, from a business perspective, right? He wants to double outputs, but only increase inputs by 20%, right? I mean, that's right. You get that by having the assembly line, right? And that goes all the way back to Adam Smith, right? Highly specialized production by workers that are all then together making that larger product, right? His analogy of the pin factory, and that's the whole benefit of the rate of specialized labor. But he can't do that now. So that's the issue, the challenge that I was talking about last week is, if he can't do that, then the problem is either he's not delivering on this end, which is kind of the problem he's facing more now, is that he's got the orders for things, but he's having to, he doesn't have enough to do an assembly line, but he has too much that he can't do it all by hand. So he's in this kind of like really weird space. So he either needs to be more boutique, or he needs to just lower prices and flood the market. I mean, one way or the other you'll have to choose, or someone will choose for him. Right? I mean, it's not that Tesla is a bad business. It just has to decide what kind of vehicle is it going to be. Is it going to be that fancy one, right, that costs $75,000, or is he going to make $30,000 cars, right? Yeah, Ford has a luxury division, but I don't know too many people buy Lincolns, right? Most people just drive Ford, right? Toyota and Lexus, that's a little bit harder, right? But most people just buy this, right? And then you've got like Maserati, right? I don't think there's like an unfancy Maserati. I think they're all fancy, right? Usually, right, that's what you stick to. And, you know, the reason why is because I don't think Lexuses are made by Lexi are made by him, but right, they're made differently than Toyotas, even if they have the same parts. Same with Teslas versus Chevys. Okay, so let's just look at a very simple example here. So this would be square root of KL. So then if this is state, I mean, I guess I should have added this. This would be situation number 1 or state number 1, and this would be state number 2. And in state number 2, then let's say that we're increasing it then by 25%. Let's just use the Z from the previous slide. Then, right, still taking the square root. Now I'm just distributing by 0.25 across both components. Z times Z is Z squared, right? And then KL. Square root of Z squared is Z, right? Coming out to the front, and Z. So this would be an example where I have constant returns to scale, right? And the constant returns to scale would emerge as long as that's something greater than 0. So for instance, 3 FKL, right? That would be constant returns to scale, meaning I'm getting doubling my inputs, doubling my outputs, or increasing by the same factor, at least. Because what you would see here, right? FZKZL equals ZFKL, right? So that means increasing this by 0.25 would increase that side by 0.25 because it's the same Z factor right here. That's just a simple math example. Here, for decreasing returns to scale, we could look at this from an additive perspective. So let's keep the same let's just presume it's the same set of products, the same product that's being produced. But now, instead of it being multiplicative, it's now additive. Which means then if I do the same 0.25 as a factor here, right? It's distributed right now here. Now, what I have to then do from an algebraic standpoint is I need to try to simplify things and try to make it more pretty is basically what I'm trying to do here. So you can see that what I'm doing here is that square root of Z plus square root of Z, K plus L, right? So then I'm left with square root of Z, square root of K plus square root of L.
Wait.
Yep.
So the first line is pretty much when we haven't done anything to it. That's already our current like.
It's like state, it's like let's call it the present moment.
This is what we know. Like right now, this is how our production is measured, so that our inputs to outputs.
So here's what's happening: is that this is let's just say this is the present moment in time, but you as the manager are presented with this is the way that your labor works with your capital. Right so now. The functional form of this is how you reflect the technology, right? So that's the reason why this is additive and that's multiplicative is just because of the industry you're in or the country you're doing it in or whatever. Okay, go on.
Predetermined.
Yeah, exactly. It's outside of your control.
Predetermined by like whatever industry or factors or
yeah, or even just the thing you're selling. Again, the reason why Elon Musk's challenge is so great is he's trying to change the function, right? I mean, he wants to turn an industry that relies on the assembly line, and he has to start it off though by doing it by hand, which is hard to do. It's why airlines don't typically start off as like being like, you know, flying privately people to golf courses, right? They tend to fly, an airline tends to start out by flying hundreds of people from Tampa to Austin, right? They don't, because of the nature of the commercial airline industry is one where you make it on bulk, right? Not the other way around. Go on to this, right?
And then when we add Z as like our new factor, we're putting in like, okay, so we're trying out this, so let's see if that works.
So here's a better way of saying it that's actually more applicable to what the business world would say. So then in state number 2, or the second line on this, then your boss says to you, 25% more people want to fly between Tampa and Austin.
Okay.
So the question then for you is, as a scheduler, let's say, is how many more workers do I need to hire? How much bigger does my factory need to be? How many more? I guess the supplies are pretty, right? And so many planes that should be pretty easy, but the other things are harder to determine. So the goal is what's on the left-hand side of the equation. What you're trying to figure out as a manager is the right-hand side of the equation. Because usually, right, unless you have like a labor union contract that says you have to hire this many workers, typically the business problem is, for instance, let's even look at this university, right? They know exactly how many students they have. The issue is how can I do it the cheapest way possible, right? How small can I get how many few classes do I need to teach? How many sections do I need to run? All those kinds of things. So usually the left-hand side is determined for you. You're just trying to figure out the most cost-efficient way to do the right-hand side of the equation. And in this case, you probably are going to want to go to your unions because you've got decreasing returns to scale, which basically means that to get 25% more output, it's going to require more than 25% an increase in inputs. So this would be the equivalent then of saying workers should be allowed to, whatever, have access to buildings after hours, or a classic one back in the early 2000s was that companies should pay for workers to have their phones so that they could do email after hours. They don't do it anymore because only grandpas have flip phones today. None of you have a flip phone, right? I mean, making fun of anyone.
Wait, so say that again. So
do you have a flip phone? No, you don't. You don't.
I know. Say that again. So this means that in order to get 25% more output, we need to put in more than 300% input.
Well, you absolutely would, because look at it from this perspective. So the left-hand side of the equation, you can see the z there is not the square root. So, right?
Yeah.
So let's just make it 100, so it makes it mathematically easier for me, right? Let's just say it's 100, right? Or let's do 25, right? So let's say, right, in this case, if I'm trying to seek, let's say 100% increase, and that 100 is the z factor, the z is on the left-hand side as 100.
Mm-hmm.
But, right, I'm only, right, on the right-hand side of the equation, it's going to be the square root of that factor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the decreasing returns to scale would mean that to get that same amount, right, I'm going to have to increase it by more than that, right? Because I'm going to have to overcome the square root factor.
Yeah.
And so again, that would be where you go to your unions, you look at the way that you're producing things, maybe where you're located. You have to really rethink things. So an example of that would be The only one I can give you as an example from my labor union contract is that people hired, I think, 5 years before me are only required to teach in person. Since my labor union contract, I'm actually required to teach. Well, I could be asked to teach online as well as in person. You know, so right, someone probably somewhere said, "Dude, these old curmudgeonly old professors are killing my business because I want to teach online and compete with Chaminade, but these old timers don't want to teach online." Right? So then, right, you go to a union and you renegotiate it.
I see. So decreasing freedom scales, their decision is, oh, we need to go start changing our predetermined factors that made this equation.
Kind of. It's more of a story of we need to figure out a new way that workers work with capital.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
We need to figure out.
Yeah, we need to figure out a new way that workers can work.
We need to change.
We need to figure it out. We need to change something about the process, or we need to convince the culture to change, which is generally harder to do. But just even using my example of unions, I mean, outside of Hawaii, dude, unions are like incredibly rare on the mainland. And the reason why is that, dude, the mainland culture is very different than Hawaii. So that represents a very different relationship that workers have been to capital than it is here.
So we need to change the way our labor works to capital.
Works with capital.
Which is pretty much the change in technology.
Exactly. Yep. Exactly true. Yep. Yep. And here's the other side, right? So this would be one where I have increasing returns to scale. And in increasing returns to scale, what you're seeing here is I increase the left-hand side. So I'm not going to do this long of a story here, but it's the same thing, right? So if I'm trying to double things, again, usually the goal in business or the objective would be you're usually given the task of the left-hand side of the equation. You're told I need to increase production by 25%. The question for you is, how do I need to change my inputs? When it looks like this, you don't need to change things very much because now, right, my z's multiplied by each other, giving me z squared, meaning I don't have to do as much, right? So, right, I increased each by z, and then z times z is z squared, right? So now I have z squared here, z by itself over here, which means that, right, if this is 25, this only needs to be 5. Because it's squared. This is typical of large-scale production. I have taught, oh man, I remember so when I finished my PhD, it was 2005. 2009. And so then you're all hustling for a job, right? So you're newly minted PhD, you typically haven't taught very much. So you don't have generally very high aspirations. You're just trying to pick any econ job, teaching job, and then you get some experience and then you move away from there generally as quick as possible. And the way that you do this is you flood the market with your applications. And I think I got like 15 interviews. So you go to these interviews. Now, interviews there mean that you go to the school, you do like a 2-day interview, and then you fly back home. And you don't know what the market's going to be like, right? So you're just applying to stuff that you probably wouldn't apply to if you had other choices, but you don't know if you're going to have choices. You just don't know. It was 2005, so the economy was doing well, but people were starting to get worried, so you just didn't know. And I remember getting this job interview at Mount Marty College in South Dakota. Oh, my God. I'd never been to South Dakota. I think there was like, I don't even know how many students go to Mount. Look it up on Wikipedia. Mount Marty College. Someone look it up. Mount Marty College. I don't think there were very many people there at that college. It looked like and I went to Catholic school it looked like a sad Catholic middle school, a sad Catholic high school, but it was a college. Well, it was a Catholic college.
1100.
1100, yeah. It was very, 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 very small. Very, 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 very small. Yeah, Yankton, South Dakota. About the only big thing about the place was there was a river that went through it. Big river, the Yankton River, I think. I could tell already it was going to be a bad place to go and that there's no way I would take this offer, even if an offer was made, because they flew me to the biggest airport in South Dakota. And I think it was Sioux Falls, I think. And usually, right, in my business, deans make a lot of money, right? Provosts make a lot of money. Deans and provosts don't pick up people at airports, right? That's what happened there. And I knew right then that if the provost is picking me up at the airport, it probably is not a place I should be going to, right? I should be being picked up by like an underling, right? Like a student or an assistant or a secretary or something. I shouldn't be being picked up by the provost. Yeah, the issue with that place, right, is that unfortunately, what's the most expensive thing in this room right now is me, right? And the reason why this class almost got canceled is because we ended up having 9 people in this class, which is kind of like the bare minimum of what's needed to cover my salary, benefits, and I guess the cost of having the classroom. Now, fortunately, I can make an argument again that I have a 40-person class and a 20-person class, so probably in the end it's all evening out. But if you're teaching at an 1,100 student school, what are you going to do, right? There's not much, right? And that's kind of somewhat the challenge that UH is facing, right? Is that you look at UH Hero, right? And although they blame the volcano, I'm not sure how much to put in stock in that because it's been declining for several years. Right? You get to some point where UH Hero will have to rethink, how are we doing this? Like, what are we doing here? I guess even probably KCC. How did KCC do this for enrollment this year?
Not that well.
Yeah, so I think we need a recession to get people back to school. My industry does well. Not gonna win things. Okay. No, but I mean, this is the thing, right? The UH system makes a lot of money off of Manoa, right? Because in Manoa, you have the exact same person, paid a little bit more, but teaching obviously many more students. Right, so you make your monies on the Manoas and the CCs, honestly, to support the rest of the system. Like your Kauai Community College, which has like 2,000 students. Yeah. They have all the right, exactly, yeah. But I mean, even something like again, even Maui College has what 3,000, 4,000 students. Not many, right? I mean, only this place. I mean, this place soon will make money. We're not making much money.
The only cap is that increase in enrollment.
Yeah, I know, but we still have to grow bigger because we're still. I mean, I don't know about you, but I buy my own pens, so I don't know too many places that buy their own pens. Okay, so we're going to make our life easy here. So we're going to start off with what's called the classical model. In Econ, we're doing eventually the neoclassical model, but we're going to start out with the classical model. And in the classical model, we make 2 pretty unrealistic assumptions, which now means that you really can't make a lot of extensions to the real world based on this model. But with this model, you can drop these assumptions and then make the discussion practical. So we're going to assume that technology is fixed. That's, again, this is kind of going back to Levi's comment, though. You can have that then conversation with your union. You can try to change the culture. You can try to do those things to change it, but they are tough. And then the other thing that we'll presume that's pretty unrealistic is that we'll fix both labor and capital stocks and keep them fixed. So I'm keeping L and K fixed, and I'm keeping the functional form fixed, right, the technology fixed. Okay. So that would then mean that your output or GDP, so now we're getting a micro, all that we've done just so far is all micro. Now what's cool is that this is now our slide where we're transitioning now to macro. This is essentially the marker, slide 11, is our marker now for micro foundations to macro. Right, so micro came first again, so macro is just built on top of it largely. So this would be pre-Keynesian macroeconomics. So this would be the macro that you would have learned in the 1920s while we're twisting our little mustache, right? Because that's what people had in the 1920s. Like Ian's drinking bootleg liquor and What am I doing? Yes, speakeasies and zoot suits and Charlestons, yeah, and and right, you would take like medicine, but it'd be like crack cocaine, right? Like you hear those, like this would be actual coke. So this would have been the kind of macro you would have learned in the days leading right up to Keynesian, even into the 1930s when Keynes still wasn't a big deal yet. The reason why this is pre-Keynesian is because think about how Keynes changes this model, right? Is that then you understand ways where there are, not to give you this isn't a second time I'm using this phrase today. It's not murder mystery here, right? Problem with the Great Depression was that the output was too low. And you can't just fix it by changing K and L, even if this were somewhat neoclassical, right? You allowed these things to change. The only way you can do to change it would be in a Keynesian model by changing G, right? And then kind of adjusting things, adjusting the size of the economy. Here, output or GDP is entirely determined by our capital stock and labor stock then. I'll repeat that again because that's really kind of the phrase, the words that exist behind this graph then. The output of the economy is then basically predetermined. The output of the economy is just determined by what you are graced by the gods with, right? In terms of your capital stock and your labor stock and the technology that underlies it. Why is the United States rich, right? Well, it certainly wasn't always rich. I mean, for a very long time we were a developing economy. But things started to get better, if you're telling this kind of story, when we built a railroad, when we allowed workers to move across states, and we don't really limit people where they move to. Right, and you also are relying on good weather and other things like that, but then you could just say, dude, why is sub-Saharan Africa so poor? Well, dude, they're just unlucky to be in an unfortunate physical environment, right? I mean, that's the story you could kind of tell with this, right? You could say they don't have enough capital, they don't have enough workers, or they have too many workers. That's actually more of the problem that Africa faces, too many workers rather than not enough. And it shows up here. So in some sense, you can't really do development economics because everything is predetermined and you're just stuck with what you got. That's a pretty depressing way of understanding things. If your output GDP is entirely determined by this fixed capital stock. So where are we going to go with this, right? The reason why this is important is that then if output is entirely determined by the capital stock and labor stock, that would then mean that the opposite of GDP, which is Y, right? Y is the GDP term. Y is also income. Y is output, Y is income. So if Y is output and Y is income, then output is exactly total national income. Output is exactly equal to total national income.
Y.
Yep, so Y is income, total national income. Y is total national output.
Income and output.
Yeah, I'll bring a marker when you take a break.
Get income and output, right?
Yeah, so.
In this model only. In this model only.
Huh. These are pretty strong reading glasses. I think they're reading glasses. Are they yours?
They are mine, but I can definitely see your screen.
Yeah, because I can't. Well, it's just all screwed up because even when I squint, it's still
Blurry.
It's still blurry. So I don't know what that means. If they are, they look
So
cheap. They look
national
like they're
income
reading
is the same as
glasses.
output, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's and national income and output.
Sorry, total national income is Y. Total national output or GDP is also Y. So the two are the same. That goes back to this. How are you seeing it now? Are you seeing?
Oh, this thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So exactly. What's going on there? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Anyone else want to put on some funny glasses?
So total national income is the same as
Total national income is output. Y is the variable Y is two things. It's both national income and it's national output. National output you more popularly know as GDP. Output is income. Or as Levi put it here, it all goes back to this statement drawing. Sure.
But that's only for this classical model.
Exactly.
Okay.
Also, symbol Y equals national income.
Yep, as well as GDP.
But only in the classical model.
Well, no. So even outside of the classical model, Y will still equal income. Y will still equal national output, but the two are not necessarily linked in with the same identity anymore. By that I mean, and you don't need to worry about this yet, but what I'm saying is that the classical model was cool because it was so easy to understand, right? I mean, I didn't see any of you standing up on your chair and saying, my God, I don't believe that. It's not possible, right? It's pretty common sense, you know, in this long discussion that we've had. This isn't that controversial. The unfortunate part, then again, why macro was born was the Great Depression, because this model has nothing, it is not useful at all for understanding any major economic event.
And the dash makes it fixed, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's held constant. Yep. So this Y is both national income as well as national output, or GDP. It's simply a function of your capital stock and your labor stock, which are both fixed. So with that said, that would then mean that then with your total income, so put it another way, the first thing that we started off with in the first few slides was how is my output divided across my two inputs, right? And we said labor and capital both contribute to the output. Mm-hmm. Well, then the other side of these arrows, right? So here you're talking about firms, and firms buying, right? Consumers sell their labor to firms, right? So firms have to figure out what kind of stuff how they're gonna make stuff with workers and the capital stock they have. But then the other side of it would be, how does the income get distributed, total national income? Because just like there are two categories of inputs, then there are two sources of income. You either then get income because you are fortunate enough to own capital, or you earn income because you have to be a worker. Right? I've noticed in my years of life that I certainly started off in this world as a person that primarily has hung out with workers. I don't know. And by owners of capital, we mean, again, very specifically, people that own machines. I did meet a guy in the islands who owns a golf cart business. He sells refurbished golf carts. I guess he would be a capital owner. But that's not really a very lucrative stuff. Yeah, and then obviously people I would know that like own physical hotel buildings and whatnot, or fortunately it's Truman's best friend, the McNaughtons. Then they've got the McNaughton group. That's pretty big. That goes back to Castle and Cook Big Five days. Yeah, those are the very few capital owners I know. More people I know are workers. I mean, right? They're paid for their labor services and stuff, right? But what this slide tells us is, why does everyone get what they get? Why is Ashton McNaughton's father so goddamn rich, right? Because, right? Yeah, he's a nice kid. He is a nice kid. But I don't see the father. But Ashton's father, I don't know his name. Ashton's father, though, makes a living, right, by selling out things that he owns, mainly physical land, buildings, equipment that's used in other buildings and equipment. He doesn't make real estate, that kind of stuff. That's all capital here. And he basically rents it out, right? And that's how he makes money. Right, I work. Why do firms offer a particular wage, and why do they pay Ashton's father the rental rates that they do? only because of how productive they are. So I earn the salary that I earn because of my productivity. Now, there are multiple ways you could try to measure my productivity. You could measure the way I'm measured in terms of productivity is I'm required to teach a certain number of classes every year. And those classes have to have a certain minimum number of students. But I'm not paid any more or less with the class is big or small. 100 years ago, professors were paid based on how many students showed up in class. So back in the day, you would each be given like a pack of tickets, and I would have to collect the tickets from you, and then I would have to take them to the business office at the end of the week, and I'd get paid based on the number of tickets I delivered to them. That would be a piecemeal business, right? And some people have to. My wife works on commission, so her productivity is entirely determined by sometimes factors completely outside of her control, right? She can be a good worker, but if she doesn't have the clients coming in that need to do business, tough luck, right? Well, right, the factory, right? Yours is mostly tips, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, right, can really factors outside of your control, right? Was the Hurricane good for business or bad for business?
Bad. Well, in a way, because on the Thursday, when it was originally right before the night was in town or something, that they were busy that night.
Yeah.
But Friday morning, it was slow.
Yeah.
That was because they.
Oh yeah, the chain. Yeah.
Locks on top of the mall.
Yeah. Remember then too when we first had class together? Remember, wasn't it the missile scare? Right? Didn't we have class? That was one of the first few weeks that we had. That was probably bad for. Well, I guess you weren't doing business Saturday morning. I guess, right?
Oh no.
Yeah, you were.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought I remember. Weren't you supposed to be getting ready for work, and you were still going to go to work when you shouldn't have because you're right, and your dad yelled at you. Yeah, I remember that. That was our first story. Yeah. What about you? Were you getting ready for it, or you just probably roll out? You seem like a roll out of bed kind of guy, right?
Yeah.
How did you know? I can just go back to sleep.
How do you know?
I was a sleepy kind of guy too. Okay, so this isn't all about workers' power or a Marxian understanding of owners of capital will always beat up others. This is all a story of it's all determined by your productivity. So
rental rate.
Yeah, so rental rate. The reason why it's called rental rate is because even if you own capital, you essentially are renting it out to yourself. So because even if you own capital, somehow from an accounting perspective, you need to, generally speaking, from an accounting perspective, right, you try to capture fair value or have some, right, account payment, right, that I have to try to track things. So in general, we call it the rental price of capital because unless you can find the financing for it, the way that businesses typically buy capital things is they buy them all at once, right, and then they amortize it over time. So you can think of it as amortization if you want to, or that you're even if I owned my own house, you're basically paying yourself rent rather than the landlord. So do you own your house? Do you own where you live or you rent? You own now, huh? Did you just buy though? How long ago did you buy?
7 months.
Yeah, not that long ago, because I thought you were going to try to live in faculty. Yeah. Where did you end up living?
Right now?
Yeah.
Atkinson. Right across from Alamo.
Okay. Do you like it?
I got a really good price for it.
Yeah, I guess that's good. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to do. I've rented my entire life. I just don't know if I can do it. Is this your first house you were ever buying? Yeah, it's going to be scary at night, huh? You're staring at your very
because you keep looking for value and then, you start thinking about equity. And
well, I also worry about a truck running me over and all of a sudden the rest of the family is screwed because.
But you got the good life right now.
Yeah, I got the great life right now. No, I mean I've got a great life right now. I got to just come up with $2,011 every month. That's all I got to do. I can do that.
Wait, it went up that high?
Well, I'm in the fanciest university housing.
Right?
Yeah, because I've got 6 people, so 6 people we need a lot of space.
And how long can you stay there?
year and a half more. So I gotta figure it out, but I'll figure it out. Now, a dumb person would say to me, dude, Scheiding, why didn't you just buy something, right? All you've got for yourself are canceled checks, right? You should have owned. But on the other hand, right, my oven broke and I don't have to fix it, right? The landlord's got to fix that, right? I don't have to, right? If a hurricane flew through and took off the roof, that's not on me, right? See you later, right? Or even when I moved here from Madison, Wisconsin, right? My lease ran out and I just upped and moved, right? I didn't have to like find someone to buy my house or rent it out. Right, so there's, even if I own it myself, right, all you're essentially doing is you're making mortgage payments, the house is depreciating, and you're essentially covering those costs, which, yeah, there's some tax advantages to owning, but it's not like you're living there, even if your mortgage was paid off, it's not like it's free of charge. I mean, capital, right? On the other hand, right, I've got crazy money, right, that I could say, oh, I'm going to buy this investment, I'm going to do this, right? Or in my case, I'm going to have 2 kids, right, because I've got the money to do it. And then, right, if I just went and bought a house, maybe I'd have been to my wife, oh, let's just watch a movie, right? I can't have, like, more kids, right? I got to, pay the bills here, right? That's what all rental rates do, right? Rental rates are either paid to yourself or paid to someone else. Even if you own it, though, you still, from an accounting perspective, you still have to take into account that expense, whatever it be. Now, what that means here, real wage, it's going to be measured in terms of the units of output. Same with our rental rate. So do you see this here? It's going to be based on then how much I'm making, what stuff I'm making, and what the prices of those products. How many of them I can make, and the price of those products. So we would especially predict, right, someone in my industry, you're each buying a, $900 class. So, right, I just collected 9 times 900. So $8,100 just got spent, right, for all the 9 of you in this class. Which, right, that's pretty productive because I'm only delivering 9 units of output at $900 a piece, right? Versus what would it be if I were delivering Cancer Coke, right? A different, so it's the dollar value of my productivity, which is kind of shaping things here. Okay, let me just go 4 more minutes and we'll take a break at least here. So then the question is, what are going to be the prices of those inputs, the labor and the capital? And as we in Hawaii should painfully know, labor and capital are very expensive here, largely from a supply side, certainly not from a demand side. Dude, we're on an island. We only have so many workers here. And it's incredibly costly to get new workers here. Even think of UH in terms of how it does recruitment on the mainland. Dude, it was like, they have to spend like thousands of dollars to get the person even to look here. Then even if they decide to move here, they got to spend thousands of dollars to actually move them here, right? I mean, on the mainland, dude, a school would just give you like enough money for a U-Haul and then you just drive it yourself, right? I mean, on the mainland, it's a lot cheaper to get a professor than it is out here. What that means, though, is that it's the most money I've ever made, right? Is being here because now on the other side, I've got to buy stuff, right? Because I got to live, which means I then also have to go to gas stations that deliver their gas from a very far distance and have, gasoline attendants that have to get paid well because there's only so many gasoline attendants and so on and so forth and so on and so forth, which means in real terms, I'm not any richer than anybody on the mainland, right? It's just that all the magnitudes of increase. But, seen a different way, if my supply of each factor is then fixed, then the only thing that's going to be determining these things, these factor prices, is not going to really be my supply side, but rather my demand side. So that's where this is different than my Hawaii example, right? Because in my Hawaii example, I talked about it solely from supply, right? And I just said, there's not enough workers here. Or you could even say there's not enough land here, right, to build stuff and whatnot. This is different, though, because now we're saying if L and K are fixed, then let's just look at it from a demand side. And on the demand side, then what we'd be looking at is CI, right? Consumption, investment.
So wait.
Yeah.
In the real world, the supply of each factor fixed? No, right?
No.
We're still looking at the classical.
We're looking at the classical. Yep. Why don't I pause right here? Why don't we pause here and take a break till 5:30? It seems like as good a time as any to stop. Okay, I'll just learn how to pause this for the moment. Well, this computer smells like it's burning something. It's pulling a Levi here. It smells like it's burning something. Maybe marshmallows or. I don't know how to pause this. How do I pause this? Meeting controls. I don't know. I don't want to stop it. Oh wait, here we go.
I'll share. I'll share.
You sure? No, but that's gonna share the screen.
Oh.
Click on more maybe.
No, you know what? Like, let's just let it do its thing. But I'll mute it so that it doesn't hear any of us. Maybe. I guess I should have been on that because that would have probably been a better. So this might have bad audio, but I'm learning. Yeah, it's much better volume. Look at that. Now the little green thing is moving a lot more. What is this one? How is this one? Let's see. Is that better? Oh, I guess it's. Oh, never mind. Maybe it's. Okay. Yeah, let's see what that does. That's just pausing it. Okay, take a break. Knock yourself out. We'll let it record. It doesn't matter. Do whatever you want. I'll use a bathroom.
I think there is one. I go first.
Oh man, I did it on the mainland and it was so brutally cold all the time. Oh, let me tell you, my skin was dry. The mainland is rough on the human body.
It is.
Oh,
Hey,
yeah.
we're watching from home. How would we get the session ID?
I would have to text it to you or email it to you right before, which I'm totally willing to do. You just have to, if you know that day especially. What I could do is set up the meetings, like schedule them in advance. I could do that because I think it gives me an idea once I schedule it.
Or you could 10 minutes before class.
Yeah, I could. Yeah. And then, that would actually be. You know what I could do? If I remembered to do it or someone reminded me to do it, you could just, although maybe the two flip them, then the problem would be destroyed. I could post it also on Lima as like an announcement. And just log in.
Is it the same meeting code?
No, I think it'll be different depending on each meeting. Each time we start a new meeting, I think it gets a new code.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I guess we'll find out.
Because I know when I did it for my over the summer class it was the same ID. I don't know if maybe like the recordings will be different.
Oh,
So maybe it's the same
yeah.
ID.
I guess we'll find out.
Yeah.
I guess we'll get it.
Some pretty intense stuff.
No, but it's cool, man, isn't it? Or no?
I think once I understand it, I'll appreciate it. But right now, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all this.
Yeah, but this is a lot cooler than principles. Like with this, I don't know if you can really do a lot with it, but you're certainly going to sound more like an economist with this. Yeah. I don't know, Ian, who did you find was the most interesting in class today in Health Econ?
You mean in terms of presentations?
Yeah. I didn't realize that Gabby talks.
Gabby?
Yeah.
The one who kept asking everyone else questions.
Yeah, Gabby is a natural gabster, yes. Yeah. Gabby is a good. Wait, you would have had this section with her. Remember Gabby? Or no, she was in the section.
No, that's the one that works at Target?
Yeah.
I know her.
Yeah.
I know her.
She's in the Health
She's very
Econ.
talkative.
Yeah.
Oh, Gabby?
Yeah. So Gabby and Kenzie, everyone, we spent a lot of time introducing, actually the entire class, everyone spent time introducing themselves today.
Yeah,
So for an hour and 20 minutes.
I got Quincy in my intermediate accounting class.
Yeah, see, we got a whole introduction there. We learned that he ate the crackers of Kenzie's or Kenzie's.
Oh, he's in your healthy cleanser?
Yeah.
Still hasn't have a board.
Yep. Which we had to debate about whether that made him cooler or not. What do you think?
What's the outcome?
Well, we don't know. We did arrive at the outcome that he shouldn't go out on dates with the hoverboard.
That's a good outcome.
Yeah.
I agree.
Unless she was really tall and he needed that extra height. But then the question was, how would he hold hands with her? I think that was the discussion. Because he'd be right, like hovering along. And
Yeah, I think
So
I
you have
don't
to
think we're just not bringing it back.
walking.
Well, she had a hoverboard too. That would work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but when they interfere or interact, and you'd have to really stretch your arms out, right? To,
And they have to be in sync with each other.
yeah.
One might go faster speed if ever.
Yeah. 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 He said that since second semester.
What I want to do is make a performance hoverboard, see how fast they go.
Someone was telling me, like outside of hoverboards, like someone was telling me they bought a drone that cost like over $1,000. I was amazed that drones cost that much money. He took this like really cool video. Like he took this hike on the mainland and he took this like video of this kid class. He took this video of like all the things and he could control the camera like by a remote, you know, as it's like traveling around. Yeah, but it costs over $1,000. I thought they were a lot cheaper than that.
My parents are into birding, and they have one like that. The better the camera is, it goes up like exponentially. The cost.
So what kind of birds do they try to rake? So they've got like, so it's so different than probably our grandparents' generation, right? Where they'd have the big Audubon book and then be like,
They have that too. Though.
like
They do have
you know,
one.
like looking through
Yeah.
binoculars and like, oh, it's got like red feathers. It's a robin.
Yeah, they do all that stuff too.
But what is the drone? Is it silent enough that they can be like flying right alongside a minor bird? Or?
They can't get too close, but what they use it mainly for is like going way up
Mm.
and then trying to spot to see if they can see where they are in general, and they'll try and move in that direction.
Oh, I see.
they
So
use it
where
more
do
for
they go
scouting.
birding at? Do they do it here on the islands, or where do they?
They
go?
do a little bit on the islands. They've already like found, I guess, all the birds.
Only
Yeah.
stack.
Mostly like when we go traveling, they'll do it on like the main
Got it.
or the other islands.
Anything
They do
else?
some islands.
Worth getting anything worth getting up.
Dude, that's a pretty good thing to get up for. Cookies, I mean. Yeah.
I love this.
Or you can go to those, or those is the tuna one if you want to go to tuna route. Tuna and crackers, or Truman's favorite, the Lunchable. You can't go
Oh, that's
wrong
pretty
with
good, but I think it's overpriced.
It's $2, right? Or it's just
I'd rather go to
$2.
Costco and buy like this.
Yeah, but the ones with the problem with the Costco ones is those are Hershey Kisses, not Oreos.
Oh, I'm fine. I like.
See, but
both.
Truman's very particular. He wants Oreos now.
Well, then I'm not.
He
sure.
doesn't want, yeah, he doesn't
Yeah,
want
I'm not
kisses. He
sure.
wants Oreos.
I found your truck and mortgage thing. Comic book. And it's literally what happened to me.
Yeah,
That's literally what happened to me.
but
Now I own a house.
yeah, you do.
Yeah.
That's right. You were all living at your dad's house, weren't you? Or
Yeah, and then my dad's gone, and now I have the house.
Or you guys
wow.
like,
So how do you like being a homeowner? Are you looking for roommates? How about 6 roommates? Would you like
What's
Vietnamese
that?
food?
What's right?
Yeah, what's rent?
Mortgage. Mortgage is like
How about this class? No.
2.3
Where you guys have a beach?
Yeah.
So what are you doing with all this space then? Were you getting a recording studio in your house? Are you having run for just like ripping tracks and stuff?
No, I
That
have,
was
I have
bad.
one storage console.
MGK and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's lit.
I probably would put up a screen, have it go against the wall, and do like
Is-
weed and stuff.
His mom and sister are there too.
Oh man, they're really gonna cramp your style. Is there any way you can evict them?
No, because she helps me pay for the mortgage.
Mm,
She contributes.
yeah, but still, you better have other kinds of roommates. Like the Scheiding Lee family. We're a very good family.
So
We're
why
kind
you
of
trying to
loud,
call
we're
them
kind of noisy. We stay up late at night, but we don't wake up anyone when we get up in the morning. We generally, last person goes to bed generally at like 2 or 3 in the morning. First person to wake up is generally 7 or 8 in the morning. They like their stove and oven cooking. They're pretty predictable in their behaviors.
Maybe in 2 years I'll rent my house.
Oh, he said he has to get out in
Yeah, a year and a half, 2 years, yeah.
okay.
I don't even know.
I'm not.
I'm new at this.
I'm not really well for something. Live my car. Live my office. Live in this room. Why not? If I had like a fold-out bed, you wouldn't know because it'd be late at night when I sleep here. Maybe I sleep
Honestly,
there
you
right
could
now.
live
How
on
would you know?
campus. You could live on campus.
Oh, yeah,
You do have a
totally.
shower, and you can work out.
Exactly.
Go and make
Yeah,
an
exactly.
appointment, work
Yeah.
out for a little bit, and shower.
Yeah,
Just that.
exactly.
Rent
There's a laundry
the
mat
biggest storage unit possible living the story through
I
there.
go to the bathroom at Levi's house and I'm gonna do what I gotta do and then peace out.
How late can you stay here?
I've been here as late as like 3 a.m. and then I just left because I had to leave. They locked
don't
the
kick
parking. No, they don't. Kick me out. They have a key to all the buildings except the library. But why would I need to get to the library? I just have to park my car in the back if I stay too late because they lock the parking lot. No, but this campus gets crazy at night. Like crazy scary. Like
Really?
I've been here like 2 or 3 in the morning sometimes, but sometimes it's because like I was at home all day with the kids, like doing stuff, and then it's like I really had to get something done. But then I can't leave town until like 7 or 8 p.m. because of all the traffic. So by the time I get here, it's like 8:30 or 9 o'clock. So very quickly it becomes midnight or 1 a.m. And then the only person that's here is the professor, the one that's like in disaster resources.
I don't know.
He goes to the gym thing too. You know what I'm talking about?
No, let me see.
You go to the gym at 2 a.m.?
No, he doesn't go to the gym at 2 a.m. I just know
Oh.
he goes to the gym. But he's usually here.
What does he look like too, Scott?
The glasses, really tall, kind of mumbles to himself a lot.
It gets scary at 10 o'clock.
It gets scary at 10 o'clock too, you know.
Is he Asian?
Levi, Levy, I think his last name. David Levy?
So his last name is
I
my
know what
first
you're talking
name.
about now.
Yeah, but with a Y. So
Oh, Levy.
yeah,
Yeah, Levy.
Levy.
Levi is
Yeah, I know, yeah.
Levy.
Well, you never know. Actually, maybe he pronounces it. Maybe he's trying to take from the Levi's and make it Levy.
No, but it definitely have like a creepy vibe.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
After,
No.
like,
The
as soon
The
as
cats.
nightfall hit,
The cats run this campus after like 10 p.m. Yeah.
yeah.
And it's just so cold and dark, and you're just trying to get to your car. Yeah, no, and then I'm like,
Asian sounds fun.
The library lights and stuff.
yeah, that turns off at 10 o'clock. Yeah. Okay.
What is the time of the hardly class finish? 8, right?
Well, in this campus, the last class ends at 9:45.
So
For
the Margaret
real?
class
Yeah,
ended
'cause
at
we had
8
class
last
at-
semester.
Hmm?
My Margaret class ended at 8 last semester, and it was like so dark.
Yeah. Well, you could have still come to my office. I'm usually here
I know,
at
it's
8.
cool.
But 9:45 is the last class, and by then the air conditioning was turned off too, so the room would get super hot. And yeah, it's bananas.
I like how eerie the campus is.
Oh, so here, wait, this is the other thing that affects us, and so let's just wait here to start. Many of you need this. I'm going to try to run intermediate micro in the spring, the follow-up courses. Like, I'm going to try to do it. Otherwise, they're going to try to outsource it to Manoa, and they would make you take it online. So I'm going to try to make the argument, like, dude, we had 9 people by the end of the semester. That was, like, close enough to run the class. Like, come on, Japanese, just, you know, pay the money. Well, now this is all recorded. Please, come on, man, pay the money. But I want to be able to make it so that it's something that's as convenient for everyone. Is this a convenient time, or would you want it 2 days a week? Would you want it 1 day a week? I would try to do the same setup. We'd have an owl in here and do the whole thing. But what would you, because I have to make the schedule, and I'm the chair of the econ department, so I got to do it. Got to make the schedule to do on Monday. What kind of schedule would you want?
Would you have to do that if we did managerial?
You don't have to do this class if you did managerial.
This is a cool
It's
time.
up to you.
Put on Tuesday.
You could do this class, but have it on just Tuesdays and Saturdays, Thursdays. Yeah, if you took managerial, you don't have to take the intermediate micro. Yeah. But I could do Tuesdays. We could try to do it once a week, same general time. I like 4 to 6 weeks. Okay. Maybe I'll put that in. Okay. So where we were going with this then is that not only are the output markets competitive, but so are the input markets. And what we're essentially saying is that if you go back to your micro principles, is that if a worker then has to make a choice between, do I hire an additional worker or an additional unit of capital, they're obviously going to ask themselves, how productive are workers? How productive is capital? Some would say Manoa is too big. Why is Manoa too big? Because they have too many buildings and they have too many workers. If you were to make that argument, you would basically be saying that obviously the benefit far is deficient of the thing that I'm paying. Whereas at like this place, right, it's the exact opposite problem. We don't have enough classrooms, right? We certainly don't have enough faculty members. So like I think the year I got hired, they hired like 13 professors, like some crazy number of people the year I got hired because right, they're ramping up and got one building, got another one right down the line. So firms have to figure this out. Firms then are hiring the inputs based on how productive they are, because the productivity of them is the benefit. So on a per capita basis, right, my compensation then is my wage. Or if it's not a strict wage, it would be, right, the commission I get on each production, on each unit of production. Right, there's some compensation, and then the benefit for the firm is how much does adding a worker, how much additional production do I get from that additional worker? So presumably, workers should not get paid more, shouldn't get paid more than their productivity. And in fact, the Marxian understanding of this is that workers never get paid their productivity. Here, we're kind of assuming they do get their productivity. Because here, this is not a Marx understanding, right? Is that if I knew as a worker I was getting screwed, I would just go to another employer, right? And other employers know this, so other employers know that they can't just like push me around because I can always go somewhere else. We know that that's not realistic though, because, right, what if I'm, well, I mean, even for myself, right? Dude, if I don't work at the UH, I can work at Brigham Young, Hawaii, or Hawaii Pacific, or Chaminade, but those are my choices, right? Like TT come on the street, right? But I mean, I don't have a lot of choices. So, right, I mean, there might be a reason why I don't get exactly my productivity. Yet, what am I going to do about it, right? I just wanted to come here. So let me go back to this and go back to this. Okay. So there's a definition. Hopefully you remember this from your principles of micro class, but if you don't, again, I know this isn't in the medical, but you would hopefully remember this from principles of micro, especially if you took it with me. But this would be your marginal productivity of labor, your marginal product of labor would be how much extra output the firm produces with an extra unit of labor. If you at all like calculus, you can kind of see where this would be where I would have a first order partial differential, which we'll talk about. We'll do some of the math of this, but you could basically imagine in that production function with y equals FKL, that I would use the power rule, and right, I would take a first order partial differential, which would mean I would keep the capital fixed, bring the exponent down from the labor stock, put it in the front, right, and then the exponent minus 1 as my power for my labor. And that would tell me something about how much extra output do I get from an extra worker. So I could take this, if you like math and you think in those terms, this is just the first order partial differential. If what I just said seems really, really icky, just think of it as what's written out here, is how much extra stuff do I get from this extra stuff? How much extra stuff do I get from having one more worker? Okay. And what we know is that that production function, so a first order partial differential keeps the capital stock fixed, allows labor to change, because that's the whole point, right? We want labor to change because we want to know how productive labor is. And what we would see is that the first order partial differential, right, is getting smaller and smaller. Or another way of saying it would be is that from left to right, that it's getting smaller. In other words, as I get more workers, it is generally true that the workers get less and less productive. And that if you were to extend this further, it actually becomes negative. Why is, and I'm not just picking on Manoa, it's the biggest example I can think of on the islands. Why is Manoa so unproductive? Because they have so many offices, right? And so you have no idea who everyone is, even though you're all on the same campus. On this campus, I know every advisor, right? I mean, dude, you know, like, it's not like I don't know who the advisors are. Dude, we even know who the, like, security guards and custodians are here for small enough, right? I know all the librarians. There's not too many faculty members I don't know either. We're clearly still on the left portion of this graph on this campus because, right, I mean, none of us can get lost. None of us could be, like, zombie employees who collect a paycheck and just not show up to a job, right? But if the company becomes bigger or the campus becomes bigger, you'll get to a point where an office exists and no one knows that you actually exist. You know, and we're not just talking about like the hidden accountants and the business office kind of people, Cass and Adrian, right? Yeah, you even know them, right? Like, we're not talking about that kind of hiddenness. We're talking about hiddenness where no one's assessing what your job is anymore. No one's assessing whether your job is even required anymore. And no one knows that you exist. That would be when you're way out here. And the problem that starts to happen is the workers are, the story of this is that the workers are getting crowded around that same number of capital units. So I just had to get a printer put in my own office, which is kind of nuts. And the reason, the justification I could use is that there's probably, I don't know, like 40 or 50 faculty members that were all sharing one copier on the second floor. So if I wanted to print something, I usually, right, I'd have to send the print job, and then I'd have to get out of my office, go all the way upstairs, go through a locked door, and then there was usually like 2 or 3 people waiting for their print jobs. Dude, right? I mean, that's kind of unproductive, right? And people in the fiscal office were like, well, dude, it's, well, I didn't say dude, but right, I mean, the story was, it's really much more costly to buy multiple toners and multiple machines. But the other side of it was, dude, I'm just sitting here waiting for my print job, right? I mean, I'm a highly paid employee too, and I'm just sitting here waiting for a print job to come out. And also, when my job is printing, someone else is waiting for me to pick up my print job. So why don't you just buy me a cheap printer? It's not like I spend my whole day just printing stuff. So they bought me a $100 printer, right? Now with that $100 printer, right, I'm reducing my use on the very expensive, many, many thousands of dollars printer. But also, I don't have to like go out of my office and walk upstairs and then come back downstairs. Somewhat of an admission on the part of the university that maybe we need to increase the capital stack. Now, when you do that, the whole function starts to shift out. Because now you have the same number of workers with more capital, which we know would increase the amount of output. So maybe they want me to do more stuff. And you can see here it's getting flatter and flatter and flatter. Workers become, the story here is that the workers are becoming crowded around those units of capital. That's the story here. What about at the factory? What do you guys all use the same cash register? Or no, or do you have?
We are our own.
Or do you do like a phone kind of thing?
No, kind of like we put it into the computer and tell us an exchange.
Yeah.
But then we have like our wallet, our server bank.
Well,
like
money.
Your fanny pack.
Yeah.
Yeah. But right, it's also like the people at Target, right? Like those people at Target usually have that like thing too where they can like scan the thing like on their like phone device kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we see here, right? So we see here that the workers are becoming less and less productive because the workers, we have more workers, but the capital stock itself is fixed. Fewer machines per worker, lower worker productivity. So really your only way to get around these diminishing marginal returns, which are a realistic part of this story, the only way to get around it is by one of two things. What would you do? How could you get around this problem?
While holding K fixed?
No, you
Increase K?
So the one obvious thing is increasing K. And then what's the other side of the story? What else could you do?
Make L more productive?
Yeah, I actually didn't think about that. Yeah, you could actually make the workers better and have the same number of workers, yeah? So yeah, there's 3. What's the third one now?
Oh, I don't know.
No, the third one's just as easy, actually. It's easier than what you just said. So yeah, actually, so Levi's right. So you could actually increase the number of you could increase the amount of capital, you could increase the quality of the laborers, and there's even a simpler one beyond that. Change the technology.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So you could try to change the way that workers work with the capital and make them more productive. From a practical standpoint, most developing economies focus on controlling the extent to which L increases while trying to increase K. So they do a combination of the two. That's your China story. China, with its one-child policy, is trying to control the rate of increase of L, and it's trying to use the savings from not having to build so many diapers and things like that, and build more capital things. So that if you control your number of workers and your capital stock, even if we presume it's fixed in China, which it's not, but even if we did, you'd still have more capital per worker because you controlled your number of workers and you tried to grow your capital faster than everything else. Good? Yeah. Mm-hmm. We still have an hour left. I don't know how long you want to stand there. So like an hour. How long do we have?
6:45.
Yeah, 6:45.
Oh, someone put you down. It's 5:45. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no, no worries. No, I just don't want you to stand in there. Although I have no problem with you learning for free. I just don't want you having to learn for free.
I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Don't interrupt me. No, you're fine. So the other side of this would be, right, if we try to understand this now in terms of the wages, right? Because the other graph was the productivity, the amount of stuff they made. What that would then mean is we would need to think about how many workers do employers want at certain wages. Obviously, if the wages are very high, there's not a lot of demand for their, especially from the employer's perspective. There's not a lot of demand for their labor. On the opposing side, if workers are cheap, fiber, right? Everyone wants I want to go on this thing. Do you write a lot of love notes and poetry to your wife? I don't either. I don't hear a lot of complaints. You know what I like buying my wife? Oversized cards. You know those like huge giant cards? I like doing that, but I don't. I think she thinks it's cheesy. I don't want to. I've never
I
been.
don't even buy her flowers.
Oh, I bought my wife flowers for her birthday on Monday. I guess it's not this. Why Charleston area research? Charleston? It's a horrible website. Oh, is it? NMB.com. I'm sorry if anyone's offended. I don't know what it is yet. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, okay, thank God. Okay. Hey, you never know what site you're going on. I really don't want to have to log in. Can I just look at stuff? Yeah, so I mean, the whole idea here would be I want someone to write me a paper. Maybe someone will write me a paper. Yeah, they would. They totally would. Technical writing, proofreading, and editing. Research. Oh, look, senior seminar, dude. Right? Someone could write their senior seminar project here. This person is going to write me a quality essay and articles on any education.
Oh, right. Authority, like,
$500. Exceptional guide and using on system research and case study to show your work. Or write produce
who are you these things?
a blockchain ICO paper. Wow, that's.
Wow.
Oh, I will do a quality report. I don't even need to do my job anymore. I'm going to say, I just got to look for the one that says, I will teach an intermediate macro lecture.
It's starting at $5.
Well, yeah, but I mean, if you're, if you're willing to.
Who review these things too, like 25 reviews after the over.
10 reviews.
Oh, look at this here. This person, she looks too fancy to be writing the foolproof psychology philosophy. Where's the econ ones? Ooh, guidance and law at $5. Why couldn't I get a law response for $5? Book summary, tutor, detailed and high quality paper. Yeah, let's see. What do you want? What do you want them to do? Let's just type econ. Let's see what they'll do.
Find service.
Here we go. Under 3 days for $5.
Or
It's actually not worth
It didn't write me 250 words for $5. That's not bad. That's not. How much is it for premium? Finally, oh, so this is what you need for senior seminar. You'll need a few more words too, but dude, that's not too bad. Let's say, what is it? Senior seminar paper would be about 4,000 words, maybe.
Or $60.
Or $60. Why do you even like? Why are you even stressing? Look at that. And it'll take you only 5 days. He could. He's already got an order in queue, so he's working hard right now. See him? He's working hard right now on the paper.
I use Malaysia.
Wow. He went to LSE. He went to London School of Economics too.
He's making how much of that though?
Well, exactly. So he's probably making what, 120 or 130 of that 160, and then you gotta, so to live in, I guess. I guess I should stay with my job then. That's what I'm saying here. I don't want to have to write papers for people for $100. I will.
But in Malaysia, 120 American.
I'll say here's our story. Exactly. Here's our story. Exactly. Yep. I'd rather work at the factory. No offense. Do that.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So you can do. Yeah. You can do translation. What do you want to do translation of?
No, he said he hates writing papers.
Oh.
And I said, well, then there's your solution.
Yeah. No. Exactly. No, it's totally your solution. Yeah. I'd like to read a paper by someone at LSE. Yeah, sure. We're having them do the paper for you. Although then it'd be like, Levi, why are you writing with British English? Why aren't you using Z's? Why do you have too many U's in your language?
Why you spell color?
Yeah, with a U, yeah. I'd be like, what's this like weird fetish you got with Malaysia going on in your paper? What's going on here? Yeah. Okay, so we need to put supply with demand. So the labor supply is fixed, right? That's what we presumed L was fixed. So that's why we have the red line here. So if labor supply is fixed, demand for labor, which is a function of the marginal productivity of labor, is downward sloping. Well, dude, just go back to your principles days. Put the two together. We can exactly determine how the wage is now determined in the economy. What is the wage a function of? What's the only thing that's changing here? Labor. Yeah, and what's labor demand a function of? Why is my employer paying me what they're paying me? Productivity. So that's the only thing that's changing here. So this slide illustrates precisely why my wage is a function of my productivity. Because the labor stock is fixed. And the demand for my labor services is entirely determined by my productivity. When I'm a productive worker, I get paid a lot. When my productivity is low, I do not get paid a lot. So my productivity is determining entirely my wage.
Classically speaking.
Classically speaking, correct. My productivity is entirely determining my wage. If you're a Marxian, this is never true. And the reason why I keep saying the Marxians here is because when the classicals are forming this macro model, they're forming it in about the 1870s and 1880s. The rival school to the classical economists are the Marxians, which still had a lot of credibility in that era. And they would be using, even in those classical days of the 1870s and 1880s, they'd be using a simple graph like this to tell their story. All started with Adam Smith in 1776, Wealth of Nations, right? Why do pin factory workers get paid so much in London? Because they're quite productive. Whereas again, Karl Marx, looking at the exact same society, would be, dude, pin factory workers are losing their arms and they're always going to be stuck being pin factory workers because the pin factory owner never will pay the productivity wage. In fact, they will only pay them. The Marxian side of the story is workers only get paid enough to show up for work the next day, and that's as little as they get. It's called subsistence wage. Again, I don't personally subscribe to that, but although there's some days I feel like that. It's not generally true, but this is the classical model.
So MPL is actually the derivative of
The first order
Production.
partial derivative of the production.
production function.
Yep, first order partial derivative. First order because it's the first derivative, partial because it's only labor that's changing and not the capital stuff. First order partial derivative is a fancier way of just saying, let's just look at the slope with respect to labor.
Slope of the tangent.
The slope, yep, the slope of the tangent. Yep. And you may remember from geometry, the slope of your line of tangency is an approximation. Your first order partial is exactly precisely.
Constant.
Yep. K is constant. Yep. Or in this case, L is constant. So you actually are seeing both L and K constant here because you're seeing K constant where? Where's K constant in this graph?
In the line, the function MPL.
Yep, correct. Yep. K is constant, but that's kind of hidden behind the MPL. Yep. So, where do we go from here? So, we have just seen, and again, I did type these, so I don't know what I was thinking of when I was taking this, but so yeah, so our marginal productivity of labor is exactly equal to the real wage. The real wage being W over P. It's called real wage because it's the nominal wage divided by the prevailing inflation rate, basically, in the economy, or price level in the economy. I get paid a lot in Hawaii, but it's because I live in an expensive state. So does everyone else in the state get paid more than they would on the mainland. But again, all prices are higher. So it probably all equals out. Probably. What's what I told myself. Now, this goes back to, we can do the same thing, very quickly here, but basically all the things that were true for labor are also true for capital. The capital is less productive as labor stays fixed because you can have too many machines, right? It's also true that the marginal productivity of capital, MPK, is increasing at a decreasing rate, meaning that the first order partial is declining. And that the real rental rate, which is R over P, is equal to the marginal productivity of capital.
So same thing, but
Exactly. Just change your L's with K's. But the same logic, the same narrative can be told, just replacing labor with capital. So basically, we now know both how I determine how much labor to buy and how much capital to buy, but now I also know how much to pay my laborers, and now I know how much to pay my capital. And that's where you get this graph here. So now the question would be just the same thing, which would be, where is my labor fixed? My labor is fixed behind the MPK.
R over P, real rental rate.
Yep, R over P is the real rental rate. Yep. So that would be what you're charging me to rent your room. How many rooms are in this house?
3
bedrooms, living room,
3 bedrooms.
6 rooms. There's a garage.
I don't think you count bathrooms as rooms.
Okay. 4.
Unless you're gonna live in.
rooms.
Although
We don't count the
I want to show this. I do want to show this. So I used to live in St. Louis. Yeah, bathrooms are separate. Yeah. Yeah, I'll see this. This is why I don't want to rent from you. You're renting me a bathroom, and now you guys are gonna be like crapping in the backyard and me living in a bathtub.
Too much alpha K, too much alpha.
Kitchen.
I like to put too much alpha K, but I do.
There was this crazy because I used to live in St. Louis and I saw this and I thought it was really funny. What was more funny was the people that like on like comments list that said something. So this is in the Central West End. Central West End would be where Washington University is located. So it's a nice area. Central West End in St. Louis. So not Central West End in London, the more fancy one. This would be. I don't. Why can't I have an ad? I don't want you to add. I don't even know where the octagon is. It says look for an octagon, so I'm just like, all I can think of is MMA now. Okay, sure. This guy, and I almost rented a place like this in the Central West End because it was like a hip place to live. But look at that. There's your kitchen. It's like Levi style. Look, there's your bathtub and there's your toilet and there's your kitchen and there's your stove. It's already rented too. So someone already rented this place.
Where'd you sleep?
I don't know. It's 200 square feet. It's in the Central West End, $525 a month. And people flush with excitement. Flush with excitement. It's got hardwood floors. I mean, where would you?
Oh my God!
I guess you could sit here while you're doing dishes, right? Obviously, this is a single person, a single male, most likely, that rented this place.
And you can buy a board from Home Depot and put a futon on top. And you can sleep on top of your bathtub.
Or sleep in your bathtub, right?
I think then you wake up pruny.
No, but you wouldn't put water in it, right?
It's still moist.
Moist. Yeah, it's a toilet kitchen combo. This is why you gotta love real estate agents, huh? It's got a lot to like, including refinished hardwood floors and new windows. Like, why are you gonna be thinking about those other ones when you're? How are you gonna invite the ladies over? Dump. Okay, let's go back to this.
So MPR would be marginal product of rental rate. Is there one?
I'm sorry, is there what?
Is there an MPR, marginal product of rental rate?
No, because rental rates are not productive. So only labor is productive and only capital is productive. And what we had to determine was first how much labor we needed and how much capital we needed, but then we also had to figure out how much to pay them. And that's what we've done up to now. So now we're on slide 23.
Wait, so there's no marginal product of rental rate for K?
No. So the way that the story works here is in the first, I don't know what it was, 10, 12 slides, whatever it was, we spent our time looking at those production functions, Z as a function of FKL, to figure out how much labor we needed and how much capital we needed. That was like my Tesla story. If I need 25% more output, how much more inputs do I need? Well, all of that was determined by how productive they were, right? So whether I had constant returns to scale, increasing returns to scale, decreasing returns to scale.
I see, because...
So now, and then once I knew their productivity, then the question was, how do I know how much to pay my workers and how much to pay those who own capital? And they determined how much I pay workers and how much I pay capital by how productive they are. So productivity is this constant theme behind everything. It's both determining how much labor and capital I need, and it's determining how much to pay each of them. Does that make more sense?
So if you upgrade your printer, which is your capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
But don't buy any more printers. Wouldn't that be?
So there's two things in that thing. So there's two things in that story. Would be, if let's say I were paid per student I educate instead. So then the one question would be, how much, or the university I guess is paid per student they educate. So then the question for the university would be, how many more students can we then educate if Scheiding has his own printer? Probably none more, but right, I mean, maybe some tiny small fraction of it. And then the other side of it would be, right, how much does the printer maker get to charge UH to sell them that printer? We've always talked about it like firms sell stuff because they obviously have a cost to making the thing, and then they charge like a profit margin. Seen this way, you would be a firm that makes printers, and you say to the firm, I know how much more productive your employees are going to be when they each have their own printer. So I'm going to charge you this because you are going to handily benefit by workers having their own printers. And it's kind of like the Google story, right? Of like why they spent so much money on cloud services and us all having our own email addresses, right? Is that businesses pay for that because they want to back up all their stuff on the cloud. Because right, they're worried about ransomware and their servers physically going down. Does that make more sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're going to go from the classical theory to the neoclassical theory. So now this takes us in the 1880s, 1890s now. So the neoclassicals come after the classicals, and we start with the presumption that came from the classical model was that each input, labor and capital, is paid according to its productivity or its marginal product. With that, then we start to build a macro model. And in that macro model, we take our total national income, and with our total national income, we then have to split it up into two categories. Those that are on the worker side of the economy and those on the capital side of the economy. And on the worker side of the economy, it would simply be how many workers I have times the extent to which they're productive. And then for the capital, it would be how productive the capital is based on and times the amount of capital that I have. And if everything is constant returns to scale, now that's an assumption here, but if everything is constant returns to scale, then you can clearly see that if I were just to say 100%, right, each unit produced has only two inputs, labor and capital, then this is going to be some number less than 100, and this is going to be a 100 minus the other number, right? Because, I mean, they're going to add up to 100%, which is exactly how an economy then divides out its income to, I mean, right, this is like it's not the same example here, but it's as good an analogy as any as I can think of. I am thoroughly not convinced, and I'm an economist and I look at numbers a lot, I am thoroughly not convinced that I'm wasting my money by renting. Because if you actually look at things like opportunity costs and other things, those who physically pay rent to someone else versus those who pay rent to themselves, which is what a homeowner does, it's not that different. It really isn't. Yeah, there's some tax benefits, but again, there's things like property taxes and hurricanes and other things that, you know, I don't have to worry about. I don't have to buy as much insurance because I only have to insure possessions, not physical property. I don't have to worry about dogs biting someone because I don't have to buy that. Renter's insurance is incredibly cheap, right? I don't have to worry about it, right? If all of a sudden a nightclub opens up next door, dude, all I have to do is move, right? Rather than take a hit to my property value. So on a risk-adjusted basis, what I'm saying is that it's really difficult in as competitive as economy as we have for there to be persistent and unfair distributions here. By that I mean, the only way that workers would always be poor, and I'm not saying that this doesn't happen because we know it does. The only way that workers would be perpetually poor is if they couldn't afford, for instance, to go to college and then become more productive workers. Well, we know that that's true, actually, right? But maybe less so than the past, right? Or the only way that owners of capital or that owners of work could never become owners of capital would be, what if they can't afford a down payment to buy their own construction equipment, right? So they're always forced to rent it because they're a contractor. They're always forced to rent construction equipment rather than own it themselves. We know that those examples exist, especially if you're a small business, right? And you didn't have the business before. We know that those things exist, but then that's why you would have the government intervene and create student loans, or why you would have the government intervene and create this SBA, right? The Small Business Administration, right? Or those kinds of things where it could be fundamentally unfair. What this means is that in this neoclassical model, at least, this closed economy, everyone is neither a winner nor a loser. Everyone's exactly paid according to their productivity. And theoretically, according to this, the owners of capital are no richer nor poorer than those who do work, physical work, labor, in this economy. Except to the extent that workers are more productive, or except to the extent that capital is more productive. But if capital is more productive, now here's the other side of this. If temporarily capital is more productive, what will happen? Going beyond this neoclassical model. Because now in the neoclassical model, we're going to expand beyond this and see how this cannot be the equilibrium. What would happen if capital was more productive than workers? What would happen?
We can generate capital to everything.
Exactly. And as I hire more capital, what happens?
There's less need for labor.
Yes, but as I hire more capital, what also happens to the capital?
It gets too crowded.
And it becomes
Less
productive.
Diminishing.
And in turn, I start to scale back now by hiring of capital, right? So as soon as we allow labor and capital to adjust, it's going to adjust such that there's not really any winners or losers in this economy, right? That it'll basically all balance itself out in the long run. Now, the other side of that is how long is the long run, right? It could be a very, very long time before things can even out. But again, productivity is driving this discussion, and that's exactly what you're seeing here. Which gets us the Cobb-Douglas production function, which came about in the 1950s. It's not that old. The Cobb-Douglas production function, Paul Douglas, who later became a senator in the state of Illinois, it's the Douglas side. I actually don't know who the Cobb is. But in the Cobb-Douglas production function, which is now the neoclassical model, so I said 1950s, and at that point, the neoclassicals are just borrowing from the classicals. So 1950s, you're just dealing with neoclassical models all the way up to today. This is exactly what I said here, that the share of the total national income that goes to capital is then going to be related to their productivity. And then for labor, it's just going to be 1 minus that other share. So it all adds up to 1. And that's what happens in a Cobb-Douglas production function. All adds up to 1. The technology, again, is largely fixed. And we have constant returns here, constant factors. But basically, productivity is driving this entire discussion.
Wait, so is this only when there's only constant return to scale, or is it for any type?
No, it's just no. It's applicable to all. So here, this is a multiplicative function with a 1 lacking here. This would actually have increasing returns to scale. My exponents would have more than 1. So it actually have increasing returns to scale here. What we're saying here, because for the constant factor shares here, is that we're just saying that this A function is constant over time. So we're just saying here that capital always gets, let's say, 40% of the national income, and workers get 60%. And we're saying here that stays constant. That's what we're saying here. That the share of the national income they get is constant. It doesn't involve then that second part of the story where I then said, well, what would happen if workers were always getting 60%, right? Is that people would then start working more rather than working. This tries to just take a moment in time and doesn't want things to change like that. So I've gotten you to the 1950s with this. So this is the modern production function now, the modern Cobb-Douglas production function, which when you take intermediate micro, if you haven't taken it already, we'll spend at least a week or two just talking about this. The reason why we need it in macro is because, again, we're still trying to get to national income. Remember this Y that's here is actually the output, the GDP, C plus I plus G. and it's a function of capital stock and labor stock. But that same y is also my income.
Wait, what's L1? Why is it 1?
I was just saying L to the first part. I could have put the 1 here. I just think when I was typing it in equation editor in PowerPoint, I think I just forgot to do it. I didn't want to bother doing it. So I think there should be a 1 here. It's just I forgot to put it.
Oh, got it. That's
Yeah. It's nothing more than that.
8 times 2.
But just to repeat what I said there. So this is production right here. This is C plus I plus G equals a function of capital stock and labor stock. Production versus income. So let's say that the GDP, like in our case in the US, $19 trillion, then we'd say how much of it goes to capital is some percent of 19 trillion. And then this, so let's say this is 25%, then this would be 75% of the 19 trillion. Does that make sense? So it's also, in some sense, again, sorry, I got equation editor. Okay, can we solve what the missing thing is? Make it fun. What's the missing thing? There's something missing here. Lowercase alpha. Lowercase alpha. Yeah, lowercase alpha is missing. Where is it missing? It's missing. Minus alpha here. Missing right there. Just trying to figure out again why are people getting what they're getting. And what we're saying here is that it's also proportional to its average. Now, what that's now saying is, that's my other part of it, right, where I then said, what happens if someone's getting 25% of the share and the other's getting 75% of the share? Well, then we could think that the labor stock and capital stock may change, or that it's going to be a function of its general scarcity. And that's what this is saying here. And we obviously, again, closed economy, so it's just C plus I plus G. So now we need to look at the demand side of it, because we've now pretty thoroughly looked at production. Then we looked at how each factor gets paid its inputs. So essentially what we've done here at this point, going back to this very faint drawing, we now have understood why do firms pay consumers. And we understand this arrow, because that's their wage rate, right? And also consumers would own the capital, right, in firms that, in this model. So we understand this arrow, and we understand this arrow, because that would mean how much they actually sell to the, right, because that's the production function. Now we need this, right? And more specifically, this outer arrow, the demand side. How much they decide to buy from the firms. So that's what we need. So let's look at consumption. I will presume that you all know the very classic way of understanding this. The very classic way of understanding consumption when we had GDP was there was goods and services. This is like that, except now that we have a government, we need to think of the consumption function in a more microeconomic standpoint. And in this micro understanding here, I'm concerned about my disposable income, meaning my income after taxes, or Y minus T. And in Y minus T, then I'm saying, okay, there's a base amount I have to buy every month. And that base amount I have to buy every month is my autonomous consumption. So autonomous consumption would be, right, dude, I'm not going to be I'm not going to be a bad person. I'm always going to buy car insurance, right? Buy diapers for my kid, right? I'll buy enough water and food. But do I really need candy? I mean, candy makes this life pretty fun. Dude, I don't know how to tell it. We heard this person in class who doesn't eat candy at all. I don't know. It seems like Cash, do you eat a lot of candy?
No, I try not to anymore.
Anymore?
Yeah, before I'd
Your
always eat.
girlfriend's stopping you from eating it, isn't she?
She actually likes candy.
Why are you stopping? Is this because it's unhealthy?
No, it's just, I don't know. I kind of get sick and tired of it after a while.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, but if times are tough in the Scheiding household, obviously this would be something that I would scale to my level of income, right? So when times are good in the Scheiding household, dude, right? You buy the, I don't really buy a whole bunch of candy. I don't think I got that crazy, but I obviously buy more candy now than I did when I was 18 and 19, and my disposable income was less, right? But what we generally know is that there's an autonomous component, but that more importantly, there's also a marginal propensity to consume, which basically means that how much of every dollar do you actually decide to spend on consumption matters. In the case of the United States, it's about 0.8, meaning that the average person spends about 80% of their disposable income. Now, the other 20% isn't necessarily saved. In fact, the savings rate in the United States is about 5%, which would mean the other 15% is made up of other accounting matters, namely depreciation, which most consumers don't. Right, most people are not accounting for depreciation in their annual expenses, right? My stove and oven is getting replaced, and I did not save for depreciation, or I don't think my landlord, the wage system, saved for depreciation, right? They're just going to take the hit all at once. That's probably the other portion of it, 15%. In some countries, this is much, much smaller. China, for instance, the marginal propensity to consume is about 0.5. Japan is also about 0.5. Vietnam is also about 0.5. That's a problem if you're a country that's trying to grow, like Japan, like Vietnam, like China, because a modern economy grows much faster when your consumers spend recklessly, and that's what they have to convince them to do. You can't afford to spend recklessly, though, unless you get what? What do I need to be able to spend recklessly? Disposable income, and I need a very good capital market to spend it recklessly. Because, right, I'm assuming you didn't have money bag parents that bought you your house for you all in full, right? You had a big bad mortgage with a noose around your neck, hanging you.
Parents helped out with the down payment.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think mine will help me out with my down payment. Yeah, but yeah, exactly, right? So, exactly, right? We all need a banking system with jumbo loans to get us through the rest of this world. Or I need to move in with Leroy to the bathroom, apparently. Yes, that's what you're going to do. You're going to move a stove or a microwave into the bathroom.
Yeah, we'll be going to a board and a futon, and you're good. Good time to bathtub.
You're like,
Now that moist.
are you making bacon in there, or are you taking a shower? So this is starting out at a non-zero number because this function, that's my autonomous consumption, meaning, again, basic amount I need to survive, and then increasing at a constant rate. Now that's a big assumption. That's not true, generally speaking. We know that that's not true because certainly people that are earning very little income aren't going to spend 80% because, especially in some professions, you're incredibly worried about where your next paycheck is coming from. So you save far, far, far more than for precautionary purposes. In my wife's profession, even though these are very, very good economic times, our industry is just notorious for people in finance to spend recklessly when times are good. And then cry when the markets turn.
Okay, so
Yeah.
for the marginal propensity to consume, is the 1 unit increase in disposable income pretty much like a yen or a dollar?
Yeah, whatever your currency is. Yep.
Okay.
So it would be your total income minus your taxes, and you're just saying that I'm always spending the same fraction of it.
Okay.
This is, by the way, and again, I'm not trying to be political, but I'm trying to help you understand the ways that economics is used in our civil debate. this would be why, again, then some Republicans or conservative-leaning people want tax cuts. Because the idea would be, I've then got more disposable income, but I'm still spending 80% of it. Theoretically, the conservatives are absolutely, it's absolutely true what they're saying. The unfortunate reality is that people do not spend their tax savings for a variety of reasons. The biggest one would be and then in full disclosure, you know, I'm upper middle income, so tax changes were good for me. I'm paying less. And it probably really sucked for the person on meth on the corner of the street, right? They're probably not as good for, he probably doesn't have income either. But right, I mean, they're not good for hotel janitors and that kind of thing. For a variety of reasons, I'm not spending my tax savings. Partly because the tax savings are spread out, right? It just turns out that my withholding gone down by like $20 or $30. I'm not spending 20 or 30 bucks more a week, right? I mean, I don't even know how much, you know, it is per week. So probably not spending more because of that. But the other side of it is, dude, I already live somewhere. I already have enough food. My TV is big enough. So it's not like having more income is going to mean that I'm going to buy a bigger TV. I already have a TV. Whereas if I was so poor I didn't even have a TV, then the tax savings are good because I actually will probably spend my tax savings on my first big TV. Cash will buy candy, right? I mean, that would probably be a good thing. But I already have my basic needs met, and I even have needs other than basic being met. So I'm probably not going to spend my extra income.
This whole political butthead about taxes, it's pretty much two different socioeconomic classes being benefited by two different things.
No, it's one economic class benefiting unfairly from the other class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Because I mean, and it's not me. I didn't lobby it. But my story is always the case is I pay a lot more in taxes than all of you, but I don't expect my water to come out of the faucet 1,000 times faster because I do want that bad. Right? I probably pay 1,000 times in taxes than some of you. My water doesn't come out faster. Right? Part of taxes isn't it's more of a social fairness than it is a personal fairness. Right? If it was personally fair, I would want just as much for my money as I'm putting into the system. But dude, the anarchy, if that's the way it works. Although fun, if my water is coming out that fast. Yeah, dude, yeah. Then we have investment. So first we had C, right? So that again was all dictated by the marginal propensity to consume. In investment, it's all a function of the real interest rate. And that's largely true, right? And you can clearly see that that was exactly the logic that was used in the 2008 crisis. And my whole point of last week's lecture was exactly this, right? Was that everything is driven by interest rates in terms of the investment component. Now, the reason why last week's lecture is so relevant here today is because, think about it, what I've been saying here is that I need labor and capital to form a modern economy. So labor and capital all depend on, right, people buying enough stuff. What is all that? How do I measure how much stuff people are buying? Labor or consumption, investment, government spending. Investment is exactly a function of the interest rate. So I start screwing this up, and this is too high, then investment spending changes. When investment spending changes, then demand for labor services changes, or demand for capital changes. Right? So this is all filtering back because Y equals I. Y, meaning national income equals national income. So if investment goes down because interest rates are going up, what's happening to national income?
Going down.
Exactly. On the other hand, if the economy is being crippled by outside forces, then you lower the interest rate that increases investment and it increases production and increases national income, right? That's the kind of, this is expansionary monetary policy at work is right here.
Oh.
Yeah, this is right there.
Wait, can you go back?
Yep, right here. Yep, it's right here. Yep. So, and this is in real terms, meaning after taking into account depreciation as well as inflation. And again, even if you own it yourself, again, the thing that other people don't take into account is, again, you still do have opportunity costs, which is, again, the reason why people sometimes say it's cheaper to own than to rent. Think about it, right? I mean, again, I spend, after $2,011 a month, I'm free to do whatever I want with my money, right? And that's a lot less than what you pay for a mortgage. But yes, it's true. All I have to show for it are canceled checks. But on the other hand, right, I can do something else with the rest of my money, and I probably can't get a mortgage for $2,000.
Opportunity cost on the lenders or the borrowers?
Opportunity cost of me using my own money to buy the capital good at once, right? So there's two ways I could buy a capital good. I could either buy it through a payment plan and pay interest, or I could just buy it outright. But even if I buy it outright, I'm paying interest basically to myself. And not only am I paying interest to myself, that reflects, well, it largely reflects what else I could have done with that money instead. If you have so if you have no other better purpose for money, then yeah, go buy a house, right? Because if you have all your investments and,
or
I mean, some can appreciate. We're state employees, so we've got a pension. We don't have to worry too much about saving for things. Yeah, we got to get our kids through school, but you know, like I'm at some point where the opportunity costs are getting lower, where I don't have a lot of alternative things I can put into it.
Got it. So that means on the lender side, it would be the opportunity cost of if I didn't lend out my $10,000, what could I have done with that?
Right. I think I want to replicate one more time. So I think if we have one more kid, then I probably should wait to buy because you
gotta go to private school.
Exactly. Yeah. So then I'll have 2 kids and I'll have 3 kids on the private school. So I need money. So I work in the summer. You know.
Or you can.
How many daughters do you have again? 2 or 3?
2.
Did your wife ask you to do 3?
No, my parents are.
No, yeah. I'm worried that Levi's not gonna let. I know. I'm worried that Levi's not gonna let me move in if I tell him I got that. Oh, you know what I'll do? I'll tell him I have fewer, and then I'll sneak them in. I'll sneak them in later. I don't have a pet either. I don't have a pet, so
just dress them all the same.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What are you talking about? This is Truman. It's the same Truman. Yeah, but it depends. It's inversely related to the interest rate. This is an important picture because this is exactly the China story, and even the U.S. story as well, right? And the story for the U.S. would be, why is it bad to have the interest rate low for so long? It's because money starts going to stupid things. I'm not picking on blockchain. Blockchain technology is really nice and all, but we looked at the examples last semester, some of you with me, right? There was like Long Island Iced Tea that also made Long Island Blockchain Company. And the reason why they can do that is because they have all this money and they just can start a stupid business and get a lot of money, raise a lot of capital for it, because money is really, really cheap right now. There's a lot of money sloshing around in our economy right now. I'm not saying Tesla's got a bad business, but it's certainly allowing Elon Musk to do what he's doing far longer than he would be able to do in a normal
underground tunnel and stuff.
And this is also a China story. China's been trying to control this for the past 2 years, but they basically, the Chinese government especially, has lots of state businesses that they've been recording lots of off-the-books loans to, which means that they were bad businesses that probably wouldn't get money in the private markets, but they obviously were employing people, and they don't want, the Chinese government doesn't want to say that things are bad. So they've been trying to raise interest rates which is good because less capital means that the capital becomes more productive.
So when they raise the national instant interest rate or whatever, that's like the economic choice. Like people get together, they look at how the economy's doing, they're like, okay, it's doing this, so let's raise the rate, let's lower the rate.
Yeah, this is where macro is more of an art thing. So the debate, especially this year and into last year, going into last week's discussion, was, again, you saw that deliberate decision that was made about a year and a half ago to start reducing the money supply. And that reduction of the money supply, that's how the interest rate has changed. So it's not like the Federal Reserve sets the interest rate. Rather, what they do is they say, we would like the interest rate to be approximately this, and we will adjust the money supply to get approximately that.
Wait, so what was it again? If you put more money out there, the interest rate goes
So
up?
if there's more money out there, then the interest rate tends to fall
Okay.
because there's so much money out there, it's not that scarce. Money becomes more expensive to borrow if there's not a lot of it out there.
Got it. So money supply down, interest rate up.
Exactly. Yep. So what's been happening here lately then is, over the past year and a half, is that interest rates have been going up as a reflection of the Federal Reserve reducing the money supply.
Inversely rated.
Yep. And then the whole ramification we've seen up to now, as I talked about last week, was this is hitting the emerging markets pretty strongly, and it's starting to hit some of the tech firms, like a Tesla, like even the company that some of you, I think, you might remember when I talked about Blue Apron, the food delivery product. They're ones that like sell again a box of food and you can buy a box of food.
So that means when money supply goes up, investment spending goes up, right?
When money supply goes up, investment spending goes up, yes, because the interest rate fell.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Which is the whole point of how do you get an economy out of a big bad recession, or crisis in general. And then we have government spending. There's not much I can really say about this because this is not a political science course. G would just be the government spending money on goods and services, not on transfer payments, meaning money I get just because I meet a certain definition of something. So this would be Hawaii spending money to build a new road over the Big Island. UH spending money to build this new building. That's all government spending on goods and services. Even my wages would be government spending on goods and services, right? Employee of the state. It would not be my in-laws, right? They both get Social Security. That's not what it is. They don't have to do anything at all to get Social Security. It's the field right? So as long as they're old and complain, I think you have to complain to get and watch Wheel of Fortune. As long as you do those things, you get to collect a Social Security check. But you know what? Like when my wife and I watch it, it always makes me grumpy because they're like, "You want a trip to Oahu?" And I'm like, "Big deal." They're going to Aulani. Big deal. I could be like meet you there after work, and then I don't know. I know this is almost the end here of class. I don't think I have a ton more slides, but let's just do this one so that we can put this all together here. How many total slides? Does anyone know how many? I don't remember how many slides I made. 46. Okay, so we're pretty far here. I shouldn't have told too many stories. Yeah, but this puts it all together for us pretty well. So we started off by looking at this, right? Y is a function of capital. That was where we started off. And then we just finished doing this, the demand side of the economy. Oh, I got missing functions here. What's missing in this function?
Where?
Here.
The minus.
Yeah, minus. So this is my consumption component because this would be my marginal propensity to consume as a function of my disposable income, plus investment, which is a function of the interest rate, plus government spending, which is fixed. On the supply side, output is a function of a fixed capital stock and labor stock. What does supply and demand equilibrium represent? It represents both supply and demand intersecting with each other. Dude, how cool is this, right? It means that then it's this, Y, being equal to this right here. And again, it's missing right here. But notice...
Which proves what we learned earlier in the previous lecture.
In the previous lecture, exactly. That's why my whole last week's lecture was so important. Because it was all about interest rates. That's why interest rates are so important. And this is the modern macroeconomic Keynesian story. Is that the real interest rate is the thing that has to adjust to bring about equilibrium or push the equilibrium to a desired point. It's not that we weren't in equilibrium even in the 2009 crisis. It's just that we didn't like being smaller, right? We wanted to push the equilibrium out. And the only way you could push the equilibrium out was by, stimulating demand, which is what, right, Keynesian macro is, either by increasing G or encouraging I spending or encouraging C consumption. So this is where then the neoclassical model meets the Keynesian model, because now the interest rate's the only thing that's adjusting to push the economy to its equilibrium state. If you get this wrong, the 2009 crisis was unique because it was actually a breakdown of this entire model. The reason why it's a financial crisis is because the credit markets were frozen, which means then no one would lend to anyone because everyone was scared shitless, right? And so if everyone is scared, interest rates no longer bring supply equal to demand, which is why the government had to intervene into the capital markets, which is exactly why developing economies are usually developing economies, because they have an underdeveloped investment system, right? I mean, capital markets, and why we required so much spending on capital markets before then. So this is where I'll stop, and then this is a convenient point to pick it up then, which means then that we need to finish this discussion by talking about the loanable funds market. So basically what we did today is we talked about the supply side of the economy, the demand side of the economy, and how everything is brought into equilibrium with the interest rate. Well, now we need to talk about how is the interest rate determined. Right in my little discussion there with Levi, we kind of said, it's determined by the Federal Reserve changing the money supply to change the interest rate. That's a Keynesian answer. We actually need to have an answer that's a little bit more classical. And that's what this will be right here. So it steps away from the reality, which is the answer I gave him, which is a Keynesian answer. We need to go back to the classical model, and that's what we'll do when we pick it up on next Thursday. I actually like this. Having it as one big long class, I think, is a little easier than two. Yeah, some belt buckle you got there, Jacob.
Okay.
I didn't know you were a belt buckle kind of guy. Was that two boats on there? Or?
So I can get in, man.
What is it? Buckle it. I'm sorry, what was that, Levi?
So aggregate demand and aggregate supply. Is this a classical scenario?
No, so no, it's not aggregate demand, aggregate. I mean, yeah, it's aggregate demand, aggregate supply, but
I see the line of.
yeah, no. So these are the fixed part of the fund. Is this what you're trying to get?
Yeah. So they're fixed. So that's classical, right?
Yep, this is all classical. Yep.
It's all classical.
Yep. Exactly. Yep. Because Keynesian expansionary fiscal policy represents changing this G, and Keynesian monetary policy means changing the R to change the I. But even in this R here in the classical model is determined by market forces. In the Keynesian model, R is determined by a central bank. Central banks didn't have much of a purpose before Keynes. They printed money. Yeah, they printed money and did other things like that, but nothing more than that. Okay, so I need to stop recording. Stop video. I don't know what that does though.
You just proved the GDP equation, sort of.
Yes, it did. Yep. Okay, I'm gotta do this accurately so I don't screw this up here. Or maybe I should just wait.
Yeah, where's the guy?
Yeah, he'll come, I hope. Wait, how's this do? In a Zoom meeting? So what happens when I click on that? No, that's probably not good. Wait, oh yeah, here we go. Stop recording. Do you want to stop cloud recording? Yes.